So I don't know if this is working. We've got nobody in the chat because what happened was I'm trying to do this for the first time and I actually get it working, but I didn't know that it was working. So then I tried again, which ended the live stream. So I'm just seeing if anybody gets on the chat or something. Just a second. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Somebody send me a chat saying that it's working and I won't turn it off. Somebody said, oh my goodness. Okay. So I guess it's working. So I guess we're like on the air. You'll have to excuse me for being a retard with regard to this. I hope I haven't offended any retarded anything out there. So let's see here. Okay, so I guess we're live here, except I don't see any stream thing. I don't see any chat. Just a second. It says I'm currently signed out. God. Okay. So let's see here. Is this... We've got a bunch of Mara-made Mahayanas. Let's see. Gosh. Oh, it says stream is finished. Okay, so I dismissed this. This is weird, because I don't see... Oh, here it is. So I gotta move that over to here. Okay. And then we get the question list. Oh, this is fun, I'm telling you. Okay. And then... That's weird, the chat thing just keeps disappearing. There it is. Okay, I think I understand how it's working now. Sort of. Okay. I need a beverage after all this. Give me that beverage. Let's see, what time is it? Oh, it's already 2 minutes and 40 seconds past when I'm supposed to be doing this. Okay, so PSA says stop ending your live streams. Pranav says, oh my goodness. Mary J says now it's good for now. That's good. Coolip says it's working, which is even better. Okay. Oh, Mary J is now offended. Let's see. Okay, I can see the chat now. Otherwise, I would have remarkable psychic powers. Okay. So, yeah, it's fun, isn't it? Do not end this live. Just chill, breathe. Yeah. Well, the problem was the first time was, I mean, it didn't say that there was no indication that it was actually working. So I'm like trying to find out if I can just like try again or something. Yeah. This is what happens when people that are practically Amish try to live stream for the first time ever. So, I guess I'm going to start answering questions because the time for introductory prologues is already long past. So, let's see. I guess the way I'm going to do this is just answer the questions in the chat. And then when there's a lull in questions in the chat, I'll go to the list, which isn't extremely long, but it's long enough. And the problem is I can't really see the chat and the list of questions at the same time. If I click on the list of questions, the chat bar disappears. Then I have to click back on the recording or live streaming software to make the chat come back, and then I can't see the list. So let's see. First question is let's see. Francois. I deliberately mispronounce French words because I don't know how to pronounce Francois correctly. So let's see, do you still do sitting meditation? And as a general rule, the only meditation I still do is walking meditation and just mindfulness of daily activities. Like when I'm at work doing something repetitive, sometimes it'll just be like mindfulness mode will kick in. But the thing is, when I was a full-time monk, like a full-time professional meditator, I got as far as I could, just dedicating, much of my life to sitting meditation, got as far as I could with it, stopped making progress literally for years. And so I figure as a layperson, meditation was never all that great for me as just a kind of low-level therapy, just helping me to calm down, something like that. It's just more of a magnifier. You're just seeing whatever is there like close up, and it can have a calming effect. But like I say, I got as far as I could with it, and I think now as a layperson with a job and lots of responsibilities and duties and so forth, that I couldn't really do justice to what I was doing before. It'd be like a major step backwards for me. And so I just generally do walking meditation and just like meditation, like mindfulness of daily activities. So let's see. I gotta scroll around here. Okay. Somebody says, you have such an awesome sense of humor. It would have been awesome to be a monk with you. Yeah, I guess under certain circumstances. Yeah, I told some good jokes when I was a monk, I have to admit. So let's see here. Austin, how did your father's Buddhism differ from your own? What did he believe? Okay, well, my father's Buddhism, I mentioned this before, but my father pretty much converted to Buddhism after listening to a dead Vietnamese Buddhist monk talk about Dharma while he was being channeled through my father's second wife, not my mother. My father's second wife was very talented, psychic, like a spirit medium, and pretty much cured my father of atheism just with the amazing stuff she would produce, like writing in like classical Greek while she was doing automatic writing in a trance, that kind of thing. So my father's Buddhism differed from mine mainly because he got it channeled through a woman in trance, and the monk was apparently Mahayana, and my father just kind of got this sketchy introduction to Buddhism and then interpreted it to suit himself. Like, for example, my father's idea of ethics was that, there is no God decreeing what is right and what is wrong. And so you do what is right for you. And then he used that as a way of just justifying doing anything that he could justify. And it really doesn't work that way. So that was like the main difference between him and me. Also, he was more of an animist than a real Buddhist. So he was just sort of like what is common among a lot of, especially people in the West, but it happens in the East also, where somebody will hear a few ideas about Buddhism that they like. They seem to like it better than the other religions they've been exposed to. So they'll just say, okay, I'm a Buddhist. And really, they don't study it much. They don't really understand it very deeply. They distort things and so forth. And that was pretty much what my father did. I wouldn't really call him a Buddhist, although he called himself a Buddhist. Whereas I, on the other hand, studied the Pali texts especially, studied a lot of Mahayana texts also, and then just got it down as like a coherent system, and just tried to like objectively, empirically understand what the official tradition, what the official doctrine is. And then, then I would kind of defer to that. Or if I disagreed with it, I'd have to specify I'm disagreeing with it, where my father just didn't get anywhere near that. So I guess I'll just move on to XYZ here. Please explain Kamatana and Bhavatana to Mara Made Mahayana. He has some wrong understanding from some weird-ass Pali dictionary or some teacher. Yeah, I think Mara Made Mahayana has been doing extensive quotes of Ajan Amaro, I think that's his name. And the book is in German. And so he's translating from German to English, I think. But let's see, where is the question here? Bhavatana, Kamatana, and Bhavatana. Well, there's like three kinds of craving according to Orthodox tradition. You've got Kamatana, which is desire for sensual pleasures, Bhavatana, which is desire for existence, and Vibhavatana, which is desire for non-existence. So, I mean, all kinds of craving would fit into those three kinds of categories, although it's kind of ironic that it omits like craving for dukkha, craving for the opposite of sensual pleasure, because I guess there are some kind of masochistic types or like ascetic types that really desire just kind of pain and that kind of thing. But that's left out. So really, just any kind of desire for comfort or pleasure, desire for good taste in your mouth, you want to eat delicious food instead of icky food, that would all just go under kamatana, or desire for sensual pleasure, or like sensual craving. And bhavatana is just desire to remain alive, to remain in existence, to stay here in samsara. And vibhavatana is, for some people it just might be being suicidal, but for a more advanced spiritual practitioner, it would be just desire to cease to exist, in a more metaphysical sense, just transcend samsara, get off the wheel, that kind of a thing. So I guess I answered that one. And so I'll move on to Cool Whip. And sooner or later, like after like an hour or so as like a crude guess, I'm going to have to stop answering questions on the chat and get to the actual standard list of questions that I usually answer, because I do have, it's not quite 30 questions, so it's not as long as usual, but there is a significant block of questions that have already been submitted and that I am pretty much obligated to answer. So, let's see here. Cool Whip says, a long time ago, some Q&As ago, a person asked, do you seek joy? You replied saying you would have to think about it, do some introspection, and after 3 Q&As, you would give the answer. Yeah, I forgot about that. Do I seek joy? I seek joy with my mate. It's like, anybody who's in a relationship knows that you're way better off in a joyful relationship than kind of like a, frictiony, bickery kind of relationship. So, yeah, I suppose I seek joy with my woman, my blushing bride. And, but I mean, seeking joy from like food, I just don't really, I prefer to eat food that I like than food that I don't like, but like trying to like perfect it and being a foodie to that extent, generally I don't do that very much. So yeah, I guess I seek joy with, in relationship. Having a joyful relationship is way better than having the opposite. So let's see here. PSA for the Q&A. Is it still worth it to seek ordination in 2024, or has the Sangha deteriorated to such an extent where it's best to go about it alone like a rhinoceros, or the rhinoceros horn, because the Indian rhinoceros has only one horn. So, yeah, it's still worth it to seek ordination in 2024. I mean, the Sangha is not much worse off than it has ever been, really. I mean, there was rotten monks. If we can trust the texts, there were rotten monks even in the Buddhist time. And like the very first council, or the second council, which resulted in the first schism, was mainly caused by monks that were just not following Vinaya and handling money and so forth. So, I mean, there's always going to be strict monks out there, strict monasteries. And so, I mean, you should avoid most monasteries, which is what I did, till I got back to California and I really wasn't in a position to do much avoiding anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I eventually disrobed. Because I used to just avoid monasteries like the one I was living at in California, like the plague. And then I wind up living in one where, just monks don't follow Vinaya, and you have no choice but to break rules simply because all the monks around you are breaking rules and so forth, and it's just not a good environment. But there have been, and I hope always will be, at least into the foreseeable future, strict, serious monks at strict, serious monasteries. Or even you could do what I did. You get ordained, you get your five rains retreats under your belt so that you're free of Nisaya, you're no longer in dependence on a teacher, and then you just go out into the forest. Particularly in like an Asian culture where people will be happy to support some exotic monk living out in the forest meditating. They just think you're a saint automatically just because you're living in a forest meditating, instead of living in a town or village sitting around listening to the radio and drinking tea. Okay, so let's see. Mary J says, is it a fish tank on the left? Yeah, that is a fish tank. I'm getting it for my birthday. So right now it's still in just sort of the water settling, and I'm going to get kind of a biome of like, I don't know, microbiome, I guess, before I start putting fish in. First, just kind of let it sit. I'm going to go out on a mission maybe today after this Q&A, go to like a lake or a pond or something and get some natural water with a natural biome, and then, just pour a cup of it into this fish tank and, get some like single-celled organisms and stuff going. Preferably no fish parasites, but I'm willing to take that risk. And then after a few more days, I'll get some plants and let the plants get established, and then put in a few fish and, just gradually build up a kind of ecosystem, which is something that I really enjoy doing. I think one of my ideal jobs, like if I'm born again and, if there's rebirth and I get some kind of career going that isn't a monk or a renunciant, it would be sort of like designing balanced ecosystems and space stations or something. You got to have like the balanced ecosystem. In fact, I was even thinking for my birthday getting what was called a biosphere. It's just a sealed glass ball, just a hollow glass ball. Just no air can get in or out or anything. And inside there is seawater, a little bit of sand, and some algae and some shrimp. And they would last for years. It was just a perfectly contained ecosystem. All that went in was heat and light. And it was, the shrimp would eat the algae, then they would like go potty, and then that would become the fertilizer for the algae again. And it was just like this self-sustaining ecosystem. So I'm going to try and set up something somewhat along those lines back there in that aquarium, because I like doing that. I was kind of heading in the direction of ecology. I probably would have majored in ecology if I had gone to grad school, but I decided to become a monk instead. Okay, Wayne says greetings. Yeah, hail Wayne. Athena Sigil says your dad was a folk Buddhist, whereas you were an actual practicing monk. Yeah, pretty much. Although he was sort of like an animist with some Buddhist leanings. Let's see here. Wow, again, I'm not able to keep up here. Cleefy says, oh, Cool Whip says, Cleefy, I think you will have to practice some sati and repost. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Anyone notice that Ponyo's place slowly but surely is starting to look like a jungle? Yeah, that's good. I like jungles. Except for the malaria, the Anopheles mosquito. I don't like that much about jungles. Let's see. Okay, Elias has a question. Do the dualistic concepts of good and evil still exist for enlightened beings? To the extent that they're still communicating with unenlightened beings and using like Wohara Desana, which is just using the standard language of delusion while communicating in a samsaric context to deluded beings, then yeah, although for them, for an enlightened being, they've gone beyond good and evil. Because good and evil is just a samsaric duality. So, Austin Hill says, is karma a chetana? Yeah, karma is essentially chetana. And chetana is volition or will. So it's like karma is like the momentum of your mental states. So you could say that volition is the momentum of your mental states. It's like the momentum of your perceptions. Because mind in general consists predominantly of perceptions and will. Perceptions are like the static or noun aspect of mind, and volition is more like the kinetic or verb aspect of mind. But really, they're two aspects of the same kind of phenomenon. So let's see. Okay, Birch. Is Buddhism considered a Proto-Indo-European religion, i.e. Aryan? I ask because Evola suggests this. I think he may be right, but I'd like your opinion. To the extent that it was founded by someone who probably was Indo-European, then yes. Although it's not purely Indo-European, because I think Buddhism does rely a lot on non-Indo-European ideas, like ideas borrowed from the Indus Valley civilization, like the whole Shramana movement in India, the non-Vedic ascetic movements, like the Jains, the Buddhists, the Sankhya practitioners, the Ajivikas, that probably some of the basic fundamentals of that attitude or that point of view, that it's more or less of an atheistic system. It's more or less pessimistic in that, this is a bad place you want to escape from, that kind of thing. There is some evidence suggesting that the Indus Valley civilization did favor that kind of a spiritual point of view, and that it kind of remained among the people for hundreds of years, 1,000 years, and then became more and more mainstream as it got incorporated into more Vedic systems. And so Buddhism does owe a lot to this pre-Vedic, maybe Indus Valley civilization Shramana movement. But to the extent that it was founded by someone who was pretty much Indo-European, and that it flourished, it arose and flourished in what is essentially an Indo-European culture, then to that extent, you could say it's one of the most Indo-European spiritual systems remaining. Possibly the only more Indo-European spiritual system still in existence might be like what Mimamsaka Hinduism, which is just firmly adhering to the Vedas. That would be more Indo-European, but it's really kind of a fringe movement even in India. So of the really like mainstream systems that you're more likely to have some exposure to, it'd be Buddhism and Hinduism would be the two main Indo-European systems, other than like systems that people are trying to revive in the West, like Germanic polytheism and so forth. So let's see, Gaz. Can you see yourself ever returning to the monk life? I don't think so, not in this life. I don't think it's going to happen. In a future existence, who knows? But yeah, I don't think I'm going to become a monk again in this life. So I'll move on to, let's see. Maybe Panya misses the jungle? Okay. Austin says, have you ever read Bukowski? No, I've never read Bukowski. That's an easy question to answer. Sometimes it's refreshing to get an easy question like that where you just say, nope. Next question. Yeah, I have no idea who Bukowski is. He sounds rather Slavic, however. Cleefy says, hi, question. Someone said that Buddhism without belief in rebirth and karma is not Buddhism, but nihilism. What do you think about this statement? Well, I mean, Buddhism without belief in karma is not really Buddhism. I mean, a belief in karma is pretty much essential to Buddhism. And, for example, there's a rule in the rules of monastic discipline saying that as a general rule, if a non-Buddhist wants to be ordained as a monk, he's got to go on probation. I think it's for 4 months. But if he's like a Vedic, he follows Vedism, for example, he doesn't have to go through the probation because he's a Kamavadi. He believes in karma, which is, that's it. I mean, it's sort of like a cutoff. It separates the sheep from the goats. If you don't believe in karma, then it's sort of like a disqualifier for being a Buddhist. So let's see here. Rebirth, on the other hand, I mean, the Four Noble Truths remain true whether you're reborn or not. Desire is the cause of all suffering, regardless of whether there's a next life. I mean, right here, right now, the second noble truth is still true. Third noble truth is still true. First noble truth is still true. Fourth noble truth, you pretty much have to work on that one to see for yourself whether that one's true. I guess you could say that the Four Noble Truths are still true without karma, but karma is really what is keeping us here. Karma is what is locking us into samsara. So it's really, we're trying to overcome our karma to some degree, or rather to transcend our karma in order to become enlightened. So these cravings that are causing us suffering, those are habitual, which is karmic. It's just this momentum of unenlightenment, this samsaric momentum that is keeping us here, and that samsaric momentum is karma. So, I guess I answered that question. Man, just trying to keep up with the chat, I'm having to answer abnormally succinctly. I'm giving short answers. So, Cool Whip asks a second question here. He says, Ajan Jayasaro calls Theravada Buddhism an education system. Others call it a religion. Others call it a philosophy, a way of life, etc. What is Buddhism to you? How do you describe it? Well, for starters, it's like a worldview. It's sort of like a map of samsara, or at least a kind of compass, helping you to understand samsara. And then what do you do about it? I mean, for me, it was like a yogic system. Mainly, I mean, it starts off with the philosophy, describing and explaining things to some degree, but mainly that is just setting the groundwork for the actual practice, like the yogic practice. So, I mean, it's a religion for some people, an education system, I guess, for some people, although it's almost a useless education if you don't actually act upon the education. Yeah, it's certainly a way of life. It contains philosophy. I mean, sometimes, like in my translations, I would translate samana as philosopher. The philosophers and priests, it's a kind of a good pair. So it depends on the individual. I mean, for a lot of Asian Buddhists, or a lot of like Pure Land Buddhists, very faith-oriented, then yeah, this definitely it's a religion. They've turned the Buddha into God. It's religion. Lots of praying and stuff. But, I mean, it depends on the individual. It depends on the Buddhist, which determines what Buddhism is to that person. But like from the point of view of the Buddha himself, assuming that he had a point of view, um, yeah, I mean, it was superficially maybe in the elementary stages and educational system, and also kind of earlier stages of philosophy, because eventually you have to abandon all philosophies. And so it'd be more of a way of life, I guess, but it would be a spiritual, yogic way of life. So I guess I'll just move on to Bodhisattva. Let's see. Did you ever have an interaction with a layperson that left a lasting impact? Can you share an example of guiding or teaching someone and the result of that interaction? So I'm not sure that I fully understand this question. Did you ever have an interaction with a layperson that left a lasting impact? I did have one. It was kind of weird, and it's probably not the kind of lasting impact that Bodhisattva here is referring to. But I was in southern Mon State when I was a monk. I was like 36 years old at the time, so it was quite a while ago. And I think I was in the town of Thampusiat, which is a really nice town. If you're ever in Mon State, be sure to drop by Thampusiat. Setse Beach is near there. Also, Chaikami Pia is near there. And anyways, someone was brought to see me, and he was part Irish. You know, he had a great grandfather or a grandfather who was like an Irish soldier who settled in Burma and married a Burmese girl, or a Mun girl in this case. And he was one of this guy that came to see me was one of his descendants, and I think he was a Christian. And he was kind of an arrogant kind of Christian, partly because he may have had a chip on his shoulder because he was living in a very Buddhist society surrounded by Buddhists. He was probably a Christian mainly because he favored the Irish side of his family tree or something. And so one time, I mean, he was kind of arrogant. And so he's telling me that he studied extensively Buddhism and Christianity, and he came to the conclusion that Jesus and the Buddha were teaching the same thing. And then I said, well, there do seem to be some pretty obvious differences. For example, and then he just goes, no. You know, he just like shuts me down. And that left an impression on me. First of all, being a monk in a devoutly Buddhist society, you're not expecting people to just like shut you down. You're just like, no. And you're just like, I'm not going to hear it, and just be quiet. So that was kind of a shock, just because you're not used to that. You're used to just people saying, you know, oh, yes, sir, you're very right, sir, this kind of stuff. And so it's like for years afterwards, I would have these like fantasies in my mind of just like kind of backing them against a corner and just like listing off all the differences between what Jesus and the Buddha taught. Sort of like this little mind game I would play. But can you share an example of guiding or teaching someone and the result of that interaction? Teaching people on purpose, I think just lately since I've become a monk, that it's starting to bear fruit, I guess. I'm starting to get some traction with that. But like in Burma as a monk, people would come and ask me to teach them Dhamma. And I'd ask them, well, is there anything in particular you want to know about? And they said, no, just teach us Dhamma, because they just think that they get merit just from sitting through a sermon. You know, they don't even care what you're talking about. And if you talk about anything unusual, they'll think, wow, he's a foreigner and he's saying this weird stuff I've never heard before. Maybe he doesn't know what he's talking about. You know, because the Burmese are very dogmatic. You know, the monks all pretty much share this completely orthodox Theravada point of view, and you know they all think pretty much the same way, and so they just sit there peacefully through a sermon that they've already heard 20 times before, and then they say sadhu sadhu, and they're happy because they earn merit for sitting through it. Whereas so I mean, you don't really benefit people all that much from deliberately trying to teach them something in Burma. I mean, in America it works a little different, or in the West in general. But I did have Burmese monks occasionally coming up and thanking me for teaching them, with me not even trying to teach them anything. Like I was living at Mahagandhayon, which is a big school monastery. Like the rains retreat I spent there was like 5 or 600 monks and like 900 novices. Also like 100 mangy, scroungy dogs. And I went for alms round every day. I didn't need to go for alms round because there was like a big, like a dining hall, breakfast hall. And it was a famous monastery. So a lot of like rich people, especially, and like tourists and so forth would come and donate food to the monks. And, there'd be this long line of monks, and, it was all very picturesque, and people would be taking pictures and all that. But I just didn't have any use for that. I just walked across this rickety teak bridge called the Upane Bridge over to the village of Tantaman every morning, and just walked for alms through Tantaman village and came back and ate whatever people put into my bowl. And without me knowing it, Burmese monks were watching me do that, and then they tried it. They were kind of inspired. It's like, this is the way the Buddha ate. He didn't just go to the dining hall. And so then they'd come up to me a few times and just thank me. You inspired me to do this. Just from watching you do it, I decided I'll do it too, and I like it. It's nice. So that was like some of the best ways I would teach people in Burma. Is not really through trying to teach them anything. It's just like teaching by example, I guess. So let's see. I'll just move on to Dhamma River. See, when I go deep in meditation, an enormous fear appears. It feels like I'm going to die or go insane. It's like I hit a roadblock. Should I push forward or stop meditating? Let's see. And the problem is, if I scroll down too far, man, there's so many questions. You guys are overwhelming me with questions here. Okay, Dhamma River says, okay, when I go deep in meditation, an enormous fear appears. It feels like I'm going to die or go insane. It's like I've hit a roadblock. Should I push forward or stop meditating? Okay, that's fairly common, that a lot of people, when they get into meditation deep enough that they feel like their ego is starting to fade out or dissolve, they'll panic. It feels like they're dying. And I mean, mainly that's like your ego, your samsaric, unenlightened mind fighting for its survival. Because that's something that you don't really hear a whole lot about, is that when you're doing Dhamma practice, I mean, there are certain levels of your mind that are going to be fighting tooth and nail against that Dhamma practice, because those aspects of your mind do not want to die. It's like any animal fighting for its life. It's a cornered animal, and it's going to be throwing out all kinds of stuff, images of naked women, or just weird itches suddenly arising, or just anything they can to derail your meditation. I used to know a Western monk. He was a senior Ajan. He was like an abbot of a monastery. He could not meditate because every time he'd start settling down into like samadhi, he'd start getting some kind of samadhi. All of a sudden, he'd start getting violent neck spasms. It would just jerk his head sideways like this over and over again. And in all likelihood, it didn't happen except for when he was starting to meditate well. And it was probably like some kind of hysterical conversion reaction. It was like a psychosomatic symptom of his subconscious mind freaking out, not wanting to lose its influence, or its survival even. And it would just be like percolating up to the surface in like this neurotic symptom. And then shortly after I met him, he dropped out and fell madly in bed with a certain young woman, and probably the next spasms went away. And that's just the way it is. So, I mean, if you do experience fear or dread, it's bear in mind that is like the unenlightened aspect of your personality fighting for its survival by just throwing any kind of obstacles in the way of your spiritual practice. So I think it'd probably be good to just tough it out. Like if fear starts to arise, note the fear, and then it's not you being afraid anymore. It's just fear is arising. That's really one of the most powerful spiritual practices anybody can do, is just being mindful, so that like anger or fear or worry or anything like that arises, you can just observe it like an ichthyologist observing a dead fish and say, it's not me, it's just, fear is arising. And then that can become just your object of meditation for as long as it's arising. And then once it fades out, which it will, then you go back to whatever it was you're meditating on before. So I guess I answered that question. And again, I have to answer these questions more succinctly than usual just because people are asking them faster than I'm answering them. So PSA says, are you aware that monks with 30 plus vasas are treated like precious treasures in Thailand? Why didn't you move there and enjoy the benefits of your impressive seniority? Well, I mean, I had benefits of impressive seniority in Burma also. Although it is true, I've been told that in Thailand, monks don't last as long. It's more of a sensual kind of culture. And so any monk who's been a monk for like 5 years is already being called Ajan. Whereas I remember I had to go to a ceremony. It was the Pawarana ceremony in California, in a Burmese tradition. So I go there, and you're ranked in accordance with seniority. And I had like 25 wasa at the time. I'd been a monk for like 25 years. Still, I was like halfway back. There were so many monks that were ordained as children. You know, they've been a monk for like 50, 60 years, a lot of them. So it wasn't that big of a deal, but still, I mean, I was plenty respected and semi-famous in Burma. So it wouldn't have been necessary for me to go to Thailand and have to learn how, you know, the Thai mispronunciation of Pali and just the Thai language and everything. So, I mean, Burma really is probably a better country for Dhamma practice. You know, it's possibly the most Buddhist country in the world right now, with their brutal and incompetent government helping it to stay that way, because they're keeping out, you know, like the capitalists and that kind of thing. So I guess I answered that question. So I'll go to Mara Made Mahayana. This thing is not mine. This owner is not me. This reason for the thing's existence is not myself. Okay, that's not even a question. So I'll just move on to the next one. Let's see. Steven says, congratulations on 100 exciting episodes. Yeah, well, there haven't been any explosions. That's something I'm going to have to attend to, I think. In order to get my Q&As more exciting, there should be at least one explosion for Q&A. Okay, Austin says, how did Advaita Vedanta help push Buddhism out of India? Why did Buddhism lose to it? Well, I think Buddhism lost mainly because the Turkish Muslims invaded and slaughtered the Buddhists. Especially, I mean, they were especially against Buddhism. I learned on the Discord server just recently that the word in, I think it's Arabic for an idol is But, something like that, which just means Buddhism. It's like for a while they were equating Buddhists with idolaters, especially, you know, the invaders in India. And I mean, that's one of the reasons why Buddhism lost out is it just pretty much got exterminated. And the Buddhists were really uncompromising pacifists. Whereas the Hindus, or the proto-Hindus, they at least had like military heroes, you know, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana are both about war. You know, the Bhagavad Gita is, you know, and towards the beginning of it especially, Vishnu, God, Krishna is actually encouraging Arjuna to fight in a war against his own relatives, you know, saying it's okay. You know, so the Hindus had more of a military kind of, at least military attitudes or warlike attitudes that they could resort to that were like Orthodox tradition, whereas Buddhism was just uncompromisingly pacifistic. And so your main choices when the Turks invade your village, or, you know, they're surrounding your monastery, you can run away and hide, or you can let yourself get slaughtered. That would be pretty much your only two options, unless somehow you could just convert to Islam all of a sudden and persuade these Turks that don't speak your language that you've just instantaneously converted to Islam before they cut your head off. So that's one. And also, another reason that I have read why Buddhism died out in India is it was just becoming so esoteric. You know, it was getting into all this weird Mahayanist Tantra stuff, like Vajrayana kind of stuff that, and it was becoming so university centric instead of, monks out in the forests are determining doctrine. It's, these Buddhist university professors disseminating these really intellectual, esoteric kind of Buddhist points of view that the average Buddhist just could not understand. They didn't get it. So that also weakened Buddhism. But the final nail in the coffin, of course, was the Muslim invasion of India, which killed off most of the Buddhists. So, with regard to Advaita Vedanta in particular, I don't see how Advaita Vedanta really outcompeted Buddhism, because Advaita Vedanta and certain aspects of Mahayana, like the Prajna Paramita, were pretty much on a par with each other. They were learning from each other. They would be debating with each other and then strengthening their own weak points to defend themselves against the arguments of the other side and so forth. I've been told that Advaita Vedanta was very much influenced by Buddhism, which, that could be part of how it weakened Buddhism, was by taking some of their fire, and adding some of the best aspects of Buddhist philosophy into Hindu philosophy to kind of shore up the Hindu philosophy and strengthen it. So that would be an aspect too, I guess. That would be like the main one with regard to Austin's question here, I think. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question, which is from the hurdy-gurdy man. Let's see. Man, I'm surprised that there's so many people actually watching this. Okay, what is your opinion about meditating on sound? I have found it effective to meditate on sounds such as running water or my steps when I'm walking. Yeah, well, the founder of the tradition in which I was ordained, Venerable Taungpulu Sayadaw, he meditated on sound a lot. And the reason why he meditated on sound was because he lived out in the forest and there's crickets chirping all night. And so he just meditated on hearing, and you can get very far with that. I assume you can get as far with meditation on hearing as you can on meditation on breathing. So my opinion about meditating on sound, I've done it sometimes. At night, I'd be living at Taungpulu Monastery where he also lived when he was alive. Just crickets, orchestra all night. And you live in a forest, and usually there's some kind of sound going on all the time, so it's a convenient object for meditation. And in some ways, it's easier than the breath, simply because if your breath gets really subtle, you might not be able to note it very well, whereas the sound pretty much stays the sound. So, yeah, I think it's definitely a valid meditation technique, and if it works for you, then go for it. Okay, so let's see here. Hale Stevens, that is correct. Okay, Chakra Gosha says, is there any progress or even a gleam in the eye of potential future progress towards a based Buddhist organization? Yeah, so long as there's a demand for it, or like an appreciation for that sort of thing, then yeah, sure. It could happen. I don't see why not. Especially now that people are just getting sick to death of just the leftist hysteria that is just running amok. It's becoming less popular. It's starting to go out of style a little bit. And so, I think the pendulum I don't think it's going to swing quite the other way, but at least it's going to swing less in the extreme leftist direction. And in which case, then the opportunities for the arising of a based Buddhist organization would increase, I think. Although I'm not holding my breath, but it's definitely a possibility. So Chakra Gosha says here, if I remember correctly, Humble Stature was talking about such an idea, but the wheels may have come off that plan a couple years ago. Yeah, the wheels all four wheels came off of that plan. But still, if you get someone who's more stable that can just stick with an idea without changing plans every few weeks, which was the case with that particular situation, then yeah, it's definitely possible. Especially you get some eccentric, weird rich person who wants to donate, some significant amount of money to get something actually started, like even a bricks and mortar kind of a building, or at least, a significant online presence or something. paying somebody so that they don't have to work for a living, so they can just dedicate full time to organizing and building up something like that. That would help. So otherwise it's just going to have to be a grassroots kind of thing and just come up from the bottom, and probably sooner or later something will coalesce. I mean, there already are, you wouldn't call them base Buddhist organizations, but it's traditional Buddhist organizations, conservative Buddhist organizations, which is most of the Asian places. So at least there is that. And if you can find like a monk who's got one foot in the Asian community and kind of one foot in the Western community, who is like strict in his practice and so forth, he could serve as kind of a seed crystal. But I mean, it didn't happen with me. But it is possible. And so I'm just going to keep moving here. Okay, let's see, NPC number 6, tagging pannobhasa, aka David Reynolds, may help him find questions in the chat more quickly. I'm just scrolling down and gradually scrolling down. Okay. Pepega says, could you comment on the importance of memory as a faculty and provide some tips for its development? Well, kind of strangely, in Pali, the word for memory is sati, which is the same as the word for mindfulness. And it also kind of ironic that in the contemplative orders of Roman Catholicism, like the Discalced Carmelites, mindfulness was called recollection, which also means memory. So there is a connection. I have been told by a relatively very wise Burmese Sayadaw that really they're the same. Although it seems to me that being in the present moment and recalling the past is not exactly the same. I really do not see a necessary connection there. But the clearer your mind is, the better your memory is going to be. The more awake and alert you are, the more mindful you are, the better your memory is going to be when you have a need to bring up something in your memory. So let's see, could you comment on the importance of memory as a faculty? It's not really important for a spiritual reason, simply because what matters is now. And so to some degree, you kind of mortify the memory. I mean, you're not really going into the past. I mean, any more than you have to. If you have to, in everyday activities, you have to recall something, that's fine. But like Krishnamurti used to say, J. Krishnamurti was saying that our memory really screws us up because, when we're using words and so forth, we're relying on memory, which means we're not fully in the present moment. So, yeah, I don't think that deliberately improving your memory is going to necessarily be all that helpful spiritually, unless you're just a forgetful person. You keep forgetting basic spiritual, philosophical concepts or something. So, yeah, I guess the best tip for the development of memory is just improve your mindfulness so that you're more, your mind is more clear and alert. And also memory works through association. So anything that you can use to diversify the branches of your neuronal system. I'm not exactly sure how to do that. I'm not really a neurophysiologist, but I think one reason why my memory is better than most people's memories is that I've got this web of associations where one thing can remind me of something different pretty easily. I can see broccoli on television and it reminds me of Arnold Schwarzenegger for some reason. And I'm just sitting there racking my brains trying to think, why does broccoli remind me of Arnold Schwarzenegger? And then it might be this weird, obscure pathway of associations that were subconscious that led to Ano. So I guess I did okay on answering that question. Let's see. Now I got to scroll back up because sometimes it'll just automatically boop to the bottom and then I've got to scroll upwards. Okay. Okay, Mary J. Yeah, he's give a thumbs up. Yeah, that's a good idea, I guess. And Chakragosa says, let's see. Oh, okay. Chakragosa says he's he's withholding judgment until he sees how the stream turns out. Because I could just completely just go off the rails at any moment. So Pranav, or also known by the alias of Mr. Pranav, says, I am reading Ajan Mun biography, and there's a story that he teaches in a remote village a simple Buddha meditation, and after a few months, most of them had mind-reading power. Do you think it's possible? Well, damn near anything is possible. Anything you can imagine would be possible, at least in a metaphysical sense. And I just plagiarized that from David Hume. But, I mean, if you read Ajan Mun's biography, there's so much stuff there that is just unbelievable to a Westerner who was brought up with a kind of a Western attitude. You know, the fault-finding cobra dragon and tigers just lining up along his walking meditation path just to watch him walk back and forth. And, you know, long dead Buddhas with retinues of thousands of long dead arahants coming to visit him. All this kind of stuff. It's pretty hard to swallow. And I think that the story of, you know, teaching a simple meditation technique to some remote villagers and having them all acquire psychic powers, you know, that would be in the same take it with a grain of salt category that, you know, it's not necessarily BS, but still, you know, there's so much in that book that is really hard to swallow that, I mean, just take it or leave it, I guess. But it is possible. But that's not the same as saying that it's likely. Okay, so let's see here. See, Jared says, hello, Panyo. As a Theravadan, did or do you ever spend time familiarizing yourself with Mahayana and or Vajrayana texts? And if so, what were your motives? Well, I mean, at first, before I settled on Theravada, I was kind of leaning towards Zen, especially Soto Zen, but I've gradually acquired more of an appreciation for Rinzai koans. So I went through a long phase of just studying pretty much every religious text I could get my hands on. Pretty much the only major religious text I've never read would be like the Granth, which is the sacred scripture of the Sikhs. So yeah, I just went through a phase of understanding that kind of thing, and I was always impressed by Nagarjuna. So I've even got the fez here, the Nagarjuna fez. And so, I mean, I have read the Mula Madhyamaka Karika since I was a monk, and a book called Nagarjuna's Philosophy by K. Venkata Ramanan, I think. And I do have Mahayana texts on the bookcase. I have read a lot of Madhyamaka and Zen kind of stuff, especially just because it resonates with me, and it's not really at odds with Theravada. It helps me to understand certain Buddhist concepts better. For example, the whole dependent co-arising thing, I think Nagarjuna understood it better than any Theravadan who wrote some sort of text that people take seriously. So, with regard to Vajrayana, I really was never all that much interested in Tibetan Buddhism, largely because I was mainly interested in what the Buddha actually taught, and Tibetan Buddhism has kind of deviated from that. I mean, it's still got some basic teachings, but then it's just adopted all this other stuff, including like, you know, Tibetan shamanism and so forth, that it's just never really appealed to me all that much. Although I have read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation, the autobiography of Milarepa, and that kind of thing. And all of that was when I was a monk. Well, let's see, the stuff about Milarepa especially, I read at a monastery in Burma when I was a monk. So I guess I answered that question. So I'm just going to, let's see. Jared says, not a question. I've greatly enjoyed the conversations between Panyo and Stevens and hope to see more in the future. Yeah, I think we do have some ideas on the table, and it's largely my own inertia and laziness and preoccupation with other things that have prevented that from going forward faster than they have. And so I beg Stevens' pardon, first and foremost. Let's see. Let's see, looking through. And one reason why I'm like tilting my head back and going like this more than I usually do is because the chat text is very small. And I can like increase the size of my list text to like jumbo letters like in a kid's book so that I can read it. Let's see. Cool Whip. Oh, let's see, for Rui here in Western Europe, I just got on the stream now, 38 minutes in. Well, you can go back and watch the first 38 minutes later, because I'm not going to take down the live stream unless I'm compelled to do so against my will. So Cool Whip asks the third question here. I am confused on how karma works. Can you clarify how the principle of subjective equilibrium is not the same as for every spiritual action there's a spiritual reaction? I see the same. Well, it's not necessarily, I mean, kind of how karma works, but I mean, it's a different principle really. That, I mean, it's like how duality works. The principle of subjective equilibrium is more of a commentary on duality in general than on karma. You know, it's, I mean, it's not necessarily, well, I mean, they are interrelated, but I mean, the principle of subjective equilibrium just says that, I mean, you're going to take the half of the stuff you experience that is most to your liking and call it good, and the half of the aspects of your experience that are least to your liking, call it bad. And if you just got rid of all the bad stuff, all that would happen is that line between good and bad would just shift so that the lower half of what you used to call good would now be called bad. That's like the principle of subjective equilibrium, is that, you know, positive and negative have to stay in balance in your mind. But with regard to karma, yeah, karma is like a different kind of principle. I mean, it's the momentum of your mental states. So, in a way, it's kind of a different sort of issue than like duality. I mean, obviously, if you're creating karma, you're still living in duality. And I've never really tried to correlate the two before. And sitting here in front of a camera, I might not be able to do it very much justice. But karma is just, I mean, it's like dreaming. I mean, you are creating a world as you dream based on past experiences and just the momentum of your attitudes and your beliefs and so forth, that's just spinning off this world that, I mean, a lot of time it's a bad dream. You're creating your own dream, but still you can have nightmares. I mean, we no longer believe that dreams are implanted into our sleeping mind by a small g God, which is what a lot of ancient people believe. Maybe some people even today believe that. But nowadays we pretty much accept that we are generating our own dreams at night. You know, our own mind is generating these dreams, and sometimes they're bad dreams. But still, we are the ones who are creating them. And that's pretty much how karma works. It's just everything that you do has some sort of, it adds to the momentum in some way. So if you do something good, it adds some good momentum, positive momentum to your general stream. You know, you do something that's, you know, very negative, very harmful or something, that'll add sort of negative momentum going in the other direction. And it may be that the principle of subjective equilibrium is really going to influence whether your karma is more good karma or bad karma, just because of your perception, how you identify it. So two different people can experience essentially the same sort of thing, like it's raining. You know, you got two next door neighbors, they look out the window and it's raining. One of them will be happy because he just planted stuff in his backyard. The other one will be unhappy because he wanted to go on a picnic or something. So, I mean, the same events can cause happiness or unhappiness depending on how you perceive the world and what you consider to be good and bad. So I think it would fit in that way. But I really cannot give long, elaborate questions, because after I finally cut off the chat questions, I still got like a goodly length list of other questions. So anyways, let's see here. Rui says, would you care to comment from a Theravadan perspective on stanza? Okay, this is in the list too. Would you care to comment from a Theravadan perspective on stanza 24, chapter 25 of Nagarjuna's root stanzas, at no time, nowhere, and to no one, did the Buddha any Dharma teach? And I looked for the Mula Majjhimaka Karika on my bookshelf last night and I could not find it. I don't know where it is, but this is a Majjhimaka question, so I'm putting on the Majjhimaka Fez. Let's see here. It's not exactly a mirror when you're looking into a camera screen. Okay. So, I haven't read the Mula Majjhimaka, haven't read it in context of the Mula Majjhimaka Karika because I could not find the book on my bookcase. I hope it's somewhere in the house, but not necessarily. So, but the verse in question is, at no time, nowhere to no one did Buddha any Dharma teach. Well, I mean, that's like from a more ultimate or absolute point of view where there is no self, so there is no Buddha. And in fact, the Majjhimaka or some Mahayana Buddhists in general have taken no self to just mean nothing. I mean, nothing is ultimately real. And I think that is the correct interpretation of dependent co-arising and no self. It's not just that there is no subject, there's also no object. And so it's all just dependently co-arising and samsaric. It's a kind of illusion that the Buddha taught Dharma to liberate beings and so forth. And within the context of the illusion, it's invaluable, it's precious. But from the ultimate point of view, there was no guy named Gautama Buddha. He didn't go around teaching anything. It just didn't happen because in ultimate reality, there is no differentiation. There is no papancha. Papancha means separating this from that, knowing shit from shinola. It's like ultimately samsaric. That's what causes duality. That's like the nature of samsara and perception too, because perception is samsara. And so you do away with all the samsaric stuff. There's no Buddha teaching Dhamma to anybody. So I guess that would be my brief explanation. Relatively brief. So I'll just move on to Austin here. And I guess I can take the fez off. It's a damn good fez though. You're into fezes. Fez-o-rama on the internet. It's the place to get it. They're all very nicely made. It even has like a little ventilation hole on the top. Anyways, see, Austin says, why do some monks avoid using no self and opt for non-self? I understand that the Buddha said that believing there is a self is wrong view and believing there is no self is wrong view. Why? Okay, is this two questions? Let's see. Why do some monks avoid using no self and opt for it? Yeah, it's like Ajahn Tanisaro doesn't say no self, he says not self. I understand, and he thinks that that's like a significant difference, but it all comes to the same thing, I think. I understand that the Buddha said that believing there is a self is wrong view and believing there is no self is wrong view. Why? Okay, well, this is actually like two questions. I think some of the monks who opt for not self instead of no self are going for the crypto self. That there is a self, it's just none of the five khandhas. It's off the scale, that Nibbana Dhatu is the self, sort of like Brahman is the Atman for Vedantic Hindus. So I think some monks who don't want to say no self, they'll say not self, is in a way they're kind of leaving the back door unlocked for some kind of self-view to come in, get into the house somehow. Otherwise, they're just kind of quibbling over semantics because it generally amounts to the same thing. But towards the end here, it says, I understand that the Buddha said that believing there is a self is wrong view and believing there is no self is wrong view. Why? Well, because believing anything is a samsaric delusional view. Belief is a samsaric delusional phenomenon. Anything that you believe, which is going to be a perception, it's going to be like in symbols, is not going to contain the actual truth. It's not going to accurately, anywhere nearly accurately represent reality. So it's just a samsaric phenomenon of these symbols, and the symbols are just very different from reality. Like I've said it over and over again, like the symbols TREE are radically different from an actual tree. And that's the way perception works. I mean, you might have an image of a tree. You might be a botanist who has written books about trees, but still it's all these symbols that are just infinitely far away from an actual tree as the thing in itself, as it really is in ultimate reality. So believing that there is a self is, I mean, in the early text, it doesn't just flat out say that believing in a self is wrong view and believing in no self is wrong view. But in the Atthaka Wagga, there are a few verses that contain a pun, saying that for a monk, there is no atta and no niratta. And technically, going literally, the atta here means anything taken up. And the niratta is a past participle of nirajadi, which means to discard. So there's nothing taken up and nothing discarded. But it's obviously also a kind of pun or play on words, because atta can mean self. Niratta, I mean, it's kind of unusual, but grammatically it can also mean no self. So for the monk, there is no self and no not self. And that's just because any kind of belief, any kind of like perceptual belief is going to be delusional. For the reasons that I hope I kind of explained just a minute or two ago. So I'm just going to move on to Chakra Ghosh's question here. What is good in life? To not be driven away by your enemies, to not hear the lamentation of your women. Yeah, what is good in life? Yeah, to destroy your enemies, to see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of the women. Everybody knows that. Let's see. But yeah, just, I mean, it depends on the person, I guess. But from a Buddhist point of view, what is good in life is to have, minimize desires and be content with little, be content with what you've got, earn merit, be generous, especially to wandering ascetics, wandering holy men, to listen to Dhamma, study it, that kind of thing. That's good in life too. Some people might arguably suggest that it's even better than defeating your enemies, seeing them driven before you and hearing the lamentation of the women. So, Mahayana, and I think I'm getting the idea here that some people are kind of taking advantage of the fact that I'm not easily counting how many questions they've. But anyways, let's see. Mahayana says, do you know Ashin Otama? He lives in Mutodia Monastery in Franconia for some years now. No, I don't think I've ever heard of Ashin Otama. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, maybe I met one monk. Oh no, I met a disciple of one monk who lived in like the Netherlands, and he was one of those monks that there was some Asian monks, Burmese, I think, that were just traveling around giving talks, and they ordained him and then just left him behind. So he's like this ordained monk with no teachers or anything, just on his own, didn't know much Vinaya, but I mean, it wasn't like he was deliberately breaking the rules. It's just that he didn't know them to begin with. But yeah, it could possibly be him. I don't know. But yeah, I've never been to Franconia. I've never been to Europe in general. The closest I ever came to being in Europe was I worked on a Polish ship when I was like 21 years old and had to go through customs after I got off the Polish ship, because technically I was like on Polish territory when I was on this Polish ship. So let's see. Okay. Someone else says that Ashin Otama is Czech. So I probably have never met him, and I'm not sure who it would be. Not Quindrew? Yeah, it's like Andrew, except spelled with a Q. Any news on your next book? Well, I mean, I've got enough material to publish 2 books, at least 2 books, along the same lines as my first 3. The third book, the next book that I come out with, would probably be like accounts of my personal experiences. So it would be more autobiographical. But it's going to take like a week of free time. I guess I could just start slowly chipping away at it, just dedicating, like 1 chapter a day of just getting it edited and into a format that can then go on to like Amazon self-publishing or something. So yeah, I guess I should get off my lazy ass sometimes and get onto my lazy ass in a different chair and edit books. I mean, I need to get into the the habit, I guess, because obviously I haven't done any book editing since I edited the first 3, which was after I disrobed, but before I started getting a paying job. So I just had like a 2-month window where I just like pounded away at editing books. Let's see. Okay, Pranav, also known as Mr. Pranav, says how that fez is related to Venerable Nagarjuna. What, you mean this fez? I don't know. It's just one of those things where, how do I turn this? It's just one of those things that I wear when I answer Nagarjuna or Majamaka questions, which I guess this arguably is. But I don't know. It's got like the all-seeing eye, you know, the three marks there, which could symbolically represent 3 of something. You know what I'm saying? So let's see. Cool Whip. Oh wait, Cool Whip is referring to somebody else. Did Venerable say questions close at 1300? Let's see. If so, oh, all of a sudden it booped way up to the top. Let's see. So maybe leave a message for those with questions who arrived late. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, the more cues, the merrier. Yeah, until I'm so hoarse that I'm starting to look like Joe Biden or something. Let's see, more cues, the merrier, or the Mary Jayer. Let's see. How can we? Okay, Mooners says, how can we produce another great orator like Migetu Wate Gunananda Thera? Gosh, I'm not even pronouncing Thera right. That will defeat the Abrahamics. So how can we produce another great orator? Well, I guess yearning for one might produce sufficient karma as to actually materialize one. If you got enough people yearning for something, then the karma of that can actually help to generate it. Otherwise, we have to just wait for it to occur spontaneously. I mean, if you want to adopt a more materialistic approach, empirical approach, you're just going to have to wait for some charismatic and like, what's the word? Smooth, like a good orator. Gosh, eloquent. That's it. Eloquent. So yeah, we'll just have to wait for that, I guess. So let's see. Okay, we've got people talking that's... Oh, Shakragosha says also, what even is Shinola? Oh, it's an old saying. It's before my time even. I think my father used to say it. To know shit from Shinola. I think Shinola was an old brand of shoe polish, which in its brown color may have resembled something else. So, see, Demiurguino? What is this? Demiurguinho. Demiurguinho says, are specific karmic dispositions which perpetuates a person or jivatma, soul, in samsara. This difference in perception disposition regarding karma then can make oneself continue in samsara cycle. Specific karmic dispositions. Yeah, well, I assume there are specific karmic dispositions that will determine what kind of existence you get. And I mean, some specific karmic dispositions are going to be towards being a human, and then you're going to have subdivisions, you know, towards being like some angry human in a technologically advanced civilization, or some peaceful human as a hunter-gatherer somewhere. I mean, there's all these different streams, these streams of momentum of karma that are going to land being in various situations. And then you're going to have, you know, what is this specific karmic disposition that's going to land you as a rabbit, maybe a tundra, an Arctic hare, for example, or whatever. It's like each species of animal is going to have its own karmic disposition. And then, of course, you're going to have an infinite number of karmic dispositions that are so different from ours, they're not even going to be in this version of reality. They're going to be in some different plane of existence, for example. So, yeah, it's the specific karmic disposition that is going to perpetuate, I mean, itself, because it's not really a soul that is being perpetuated. It's just the karma itself, this momentum, this stream of consciousness or mental states or volition, will, in the Schopenhauerian sense. It's one disposition is going to be creating this kind of reality, and another disposition is going to be creating this other kind of reality. So I guess I answered that question. Let's see. So Amaro made Mahayana. Okay, that's not a question. Let's see. Cool Whip, that's not a question. Okay, Lucid. What do you think of the Buddha box in South Park? Wow, I've only seen just a few episodes of South Park. Everyone says that it's just ingenious. It's really good satire and so forth, but just the drawing style of the cartoons is so crude that it just kind of turns me off. So I've never seen the Buddha box in South Park. So sorry about that. So let's see here. Next question is from El Gato, the cat. I am 22 years old, but haven't quite come to terms with the fact that I am in my 20s. I still feel like a teenager, and I know a lot of people feel like this at my age. How do I slow down time? Well, I'm tempted to say try LSD, because then like 5 minutes can last over an hour. But I don't think that would be good in the long term. And it's just something that you have to get used to. I don't think there's any way you can avoid getting older other than just ceasing to exist. So, yeah, that kind of reminds me of like when I first started realizing I was getting old. I think the first time I started realizing I was getting old, I was about 16 years old, and a little girl called me Mister. That's the first time anybody ever called me Mister, other than maybe my mother when she was mad at me. And then you get a little older, you're getting into college, and some of the Playboy centerfolds are younger than me. Some of the athletes with multi-million-dollar contracts are younger than me. So, yeah, I can kind of relate to this. To some degree, I still feel like a teenager too, other than just the general lack of vitality and stamina that I used to have. So, yeah, I don't think you're going to slow down time. I think you're just going to have to adjust to the situation. It's like you can't really adjust the situation to fit yourself very well as a general rule. Sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. But more realistic is to adjust your own attitude to the situation. And then there's no problem. Because, as I say, it doesn't matter what it is. If you accept it, it's not a problem. And it doesn't matter what it is. If you won't accept it, it's a problem. It's just whether you choose to accept something or not determines whether it's a problem or not. So, okay, so Chakra Gosha says, how does the fez help? Well, obviously it does. Let's see. Mooner says, how many knees can a knee grow if a knee could grow knees? Yeah, that's a koan, I guess. You're going to have to meditate on that one. And Demir Guinho says, hugs from Brazil. Nice. I've never received a Brazilian hug before. Okay. So that's not a question. Okay. So I think I'm actually caught up with chat questions. So I think we're going to kind of neglect chat questions for a while. And I'm not going to see the chat questions because I cannot see, for whatever reason, I cannot see chat questions and list questions at the same time. If I click on the list questions to bring them to the forefront, the chat questions entirely disappear and vice versa. So I'm just starting with the standard Q&A 100 list, and okay, welcome to Q&A number 100. I am your host, pannobhasa. And the first question, or probably at this point, the 31st question, is from Raphael. And Raphael says, we know that the historical Buddha allowed the consumption of animal products, but would... Oh, wait a minute. I need to make this bigger so that I'm not squinting at it. Just a minute. One moment, please. Oh yeah. I can like sit way back and see this now. Okay, we know that the historical Buddha allowed the consumption of animal products, but would he allow us to eat the meat of animals that were previously kept in terrible conditions, or would he allow us to drink the milk of cows whose babies have been taken away and artificially inseminated, which is unpleasant and painful for the animal? Well, again, this is confusing Buddhist ethics with Western utilitarian ethics. Buddhist ethics are entirely subjective. You know, it's depending on your own mental states determines whether what you do is right or wrong or good or bad or appropriate or inappropriate or whatever. Whereas thinking about like the objective empirical outward ramifications of an action, that, you know, it's like if you buy meat, you are indirectly voting in favor of the killing of animals and cruelty to animals and so forth. It just doesn't work that way. So, I mean, it's considering that ethics in Buddhism are subjective and psychological. If you can eat meat with a mindful, clear, peaceful mind, then you're not doing anything wrong. It may be that the animal was tortured to death, in which case, I don't know, maybe there's like some kind of hormones pervading the meat that might cause an adverse effect on your meditation or something. But yeah, I mean, if you can, I mean, the way animals were killed in the old days, it wasn't particularly kind. You know, they get their throat cut or whatever, so which they don't like. Pigs do not like getting their throat cut. That's why they scream and gurgle and so forth when it's happening. But if you can eat that pork mindfully, with like a clear, peaceful mind, you're not doing anything wrong. And it may be that someone can say, well, a sociopath can murder people with a clear, peaceful mind, but really they don't have a clear, peaceful mind. I mean, they're in a state of agitation. They might kind of enjoy it in some way, but it's like a sick, diseased kind of way that they enjoy it. And it's not the same as eating a piece of meat. So I guess I answered that question. So I'm going to move on to Raphael's next question, which is, have you ever dived deeper into Daoism? If yes, what do you like and what you don't like about the philosophy? Well, I do have like 3 different translations of the Tao Te Ching here. I've read the Zhuangzi, and I like both of them. They are profound. But the thing is that I've never really found much to dive deeper into. It's like, those are like the 2 main texts of Taoism as far as I know. And I mean, it's not really an organized system. It's not a how-to book other than a few things just talking about the attitude of the sage. But it's not really giving you any kind of systematic method of becoming more sage-like, which is, I think, one of the main disadvantages of Taoism. Also, I have read that modern Taoism, a lot of it, especially like in Taiwan or something, has gone in the direction of like sorcery and magic and so forth, that doesn't really have much to do with the Tao Te Ching or the Zhuangzi. So, yeah, I mean, I haven't dived any deeper than reading those 2 books that I mentioned, and just, you know, occasionally reading something about Taoism that, it's nice. I like it. It's just really kind of it has like an uplifting effect. You can just open the Tao Te Ching at, you know, any page and just read it, and it'll just kind of sink in, sort of like reading the Dhammapada or something. But aside from that, yeah, I think the main disadvantages are, 1, that it's got some weird modern developments, and 2, it really doesn't have any kind of systematic method behind it, which for some people may be an advantage, but still, I mean, it's just something that you just kind of read it and let it soak in, and then you put the book down, and I mean, there's really not much else you can do, it seems to me, unless you just really want to study up on it thoroughly, find some Taoist sage. I guess there are serious practitioners and teachers of Taoism that take it seriously as a kind of yogic tradition, and they know a lot more about it than I do. I landed on Buddhism. It worked for me. It appealed to me, so that's what I went with. And I can read and appreciate Taoist texts But still, I'm a Buddhist. So I'm just going to move on to Raphael's third question. Is criticizing the authenticity of the Abhidhamma a taboo in Burma and other Southeast Asian countries, or are there already famous monks who do that? Well, I think maybe in Thailand, there might be monks who say Abhidhamma really was not the teaching of Buddha. I'm not sure about Sri Lanka, even less sure about someplace like Cambodia or Laos. But in Burma, I am unaware of any monk who isn't just like totally notorious. You know, some monk who's like on the fringe, maybe not really held in high esteem by the Buddhist community there. He might say that Abhidhamma is not authentic. But as a general rule, the Burmese consider Abhidhamma philosophy to be the highest and most important teachings of Buddha. That the Burmese just take Abhidhamma as just really, really important. And it would be a rare monk who would come forward and denounce it. I mean, I used to get into like private discussions with monks about Abhidhamma, sometimes mentioning to some of my closest like lay supporters that, yeah, Abhidhamma is like old commentary. You know, I just tell them that, you know, Abhidhamma is like an old version of the Visuddhimagga or something. Excuse me. So, yeah, it's sort of like Burma has like a medieval attitude with regard to their religion, sort of like a medieval European with regard to Catholicism. And a medieval European probably wouldn't just come out flat out and like, especially if he was like a bishop or something, you know, he wouldn't say, well, St. Paul was wrong. That shouldn't be part of the Bible. That shouldn't be part of the New Testament. You know, you get in trouble. I mean, a Burmese monk who would denounce Abhidhamma wouldn't get burned at the stake or anything, but you know, he'd lose a lot of street cred, so to speak, and get a lot of blowback, a lot of pushback from other monks, including much more famous, more senior monks than him, and you know, his reputation would probably be in ruins. I could get away with it because I was a weird foreigner. And, you know, if they didn't believe it, you know, most Burmese people wouldn't believe that Abhidhamma wasn't really taught by the Buddha. They'd think, well, he's just a foreigner, poor thing. He can't really understand Dhamma like us Burmese people. He's just a barbarian and, you know, he's doing really good. You know, like a lot of Burmese people, they'll see a Western monk or a Western Buddhist the way we would see a dog walking on its hind legs. You know, it's like they don't do it very well, but you're impressed that they're doing it at all. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Jeffrey. And Jeffrey says, sometimes things you say resonate and stick with me, such as the time you said something to the effect of, if you wake up and are not spiritually prepared, it can split your personality. Could this waking up be realizing that nearly everything you had ever learned and accepted as truth has been based on lies? Could it also be the feeling that we are in a simulation? What are the possible splittings of personality effects? Okay, well, first of all, I got to address that part. I don't recall ever saying exactly this idea of if you wake up and are not spiritually prepared, it can split your personality. I mean, if you make some kind of progress that your entire system isn't prepared for. Like in yoga, they talk about this a lot. So you have to purify your body just so that when your mind gets more purified, you know, it's not becoming too like brilliant to start burning and damaging your body. You know, if your mind is purer than your body is, then, you know, it can cause damage to your body, something like that. But I don't think I was saying that. It was like, I'm trying to understand what it was that I said that Jeffrey interpreted as me saying this. If you wake up and are not spiritually prepared, it can split your personality. Well, I mean, it can be that if you really do wake up, you have some sort of realization, some profound realization, and you're not prepared for it. It can mess you up a little bit. Like Ramana Maharshi, for example, he just kind of went into like a trance state that lasted for a very long time. He couldn't speak for a very long time. He would just sit in this meditative trance like jhana, And, ants would be biting him and so forth. He'd have sores on his legs from the insects biting him and so forth. He didn't know, he didn't care. Sometimes the only way he would eat anything is by people just putting food into his mouth just to keep him from starving to death. Something like that. But I do not clearly recall me making a statement along the lines of, if you wake up and are not spiritually prepared, it can split your personality. I may have said it, I just don't recall saying it. So I can't really like put that into any kind of context that I can really grasp what I meant when I said it. So let's just get to the second part of the question here. Could this waking up be realizing that nearly everything you had ever learned and accepted as truth has been based on lies? Okay, that's one question. I'll just answer that before moving on to the next part. I think Jeffrey is a truther that does attribute a lot of official narratives, for example, to just deliberate lies. But I'm giving the human race a little more slack, I think, a little more benefit of the doubt, in that a lot of what we believe that isn't true wasn't started as deliberate lies. It was just started as people being wrong and just promulgating their wrongness in the belief that they were right, and they had some kind of authority and so forth. So other people trusted them when they probably shouldn't have trusted them so much. Although what the normies could have come up with on their own would have been no better. So I don't think it would be with regard to like conspiracies. I don't think that would, if you have like a spiritual realization and then you look around and see that, a lot of people are really believing a bunch of bogus bullshit that's just been like indoctrinated into them by propagandists. No, I really don't think that would really mess up your mind so much. I mean, it might come as somewhat of a shock, but yeah, I really don't think it would be enough to really like cause damage to your personality, unless you're really sensitive along those lines, maybe. But then Jeffrey asked this part, could it also be the feeling that we are in a simulation? What are the possible splitting of personality effects? Well, that would come closer to the truth, I think. If you have a realization, a spiritual realization, then you would have to, if you become enlightened, you'd have to get to the point where you realize that this is not reality. You would be in touch with ultimate reality, which is infinitely beyond like rooms with doors and mirrors and so forth. Human bodies, for that matter. So, yeah, how much it would, I still don't really fully understand the splitting of the personality through spiritual realization. As a general rule, spiritual realization is just one of the greatest blessings that you can experience. So it's going to be overwhelmingly good, even if it does have certain strange effects like it had on Ramana Maharshi. Assuming that Ramana Maharshi was enlightened. He was enlightened enough, at least to consider him to be a sage, a genuine holy man. And I'm unaware of there being any kind of scandals associated with Ramana Maharshi other than his best friend for a while was a cow. So, yeah, I'm kind of at a loss as to how to effectively answer this question, because I really don't recall how or what exactly I said and why and what the context was and so forth. The splitting of personality effects as a result of like a spiritual realization. If you're not ready for it, if it's something that just hits you like spontaneously, accidentally, like some people in the West especially, I think most people who claim to have some kind of enlightenment experience in the West just blunder across it accidentally. It's like they almost die. They have a near-death experience. And then that just kind of knocks them out of this lives-long rut that they had been in. And how that would have a possible splitting of personality effect on them. It might be that there would be like the enlightened personality and the now vestigial unenlightened personality. that are kind of at odds with each other, maybe not fully getting along, as apparently was the case with Ramana Maharshi or something. So something like that maybe, but I really, I feel like I'm just not able to answer this question very well, because I don't recall having made the statement, and maybe I did, I just don't recall it, or why I did it or anything like that. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here, which is from the Thermonuke. And after I finish this list, I'll go back to the chat, and if there's any more chat questions, so long as it's not an obscenely long scroll of them, I'll try to answer those too. So the Thermonuke says, Samantha meditation, that's samatha meditation. Samatha meditation is said to have miraculous powers. Is this possible with vipassana too? It's possible, but much less likely, because generally you get psychic powers through developing jhanic states, or like deep meditative states, like mystical states, what some people might call trance states, in which you're just like completely transcending the ordinary human mentality, where you're getting into this realm where these psychic powers are possible. Just completely simplifying your mind and just kind of, in a way, almost rendering it irrelevant for the time being. And then all these other options arise, all these other possibilities that your worldview veil has been concealing all this time. But with regard to vipassana, or just mindfulness meditation, satipatthana, you're still pretty much in human mode. You're just being mindful of whatever is arising in human mode. And so the psychic powers are much less likely to arise, although they can. And the wiser you get, the more likely, at the very least, there's going to be a lot of synchronicity going on. Just weird coincidences and so forth are going to be happening spontaneously, even without having mastered jhana or anything like that. But it's going to be just spontaneous stuff you have no control over. And I do think that a lot of psychic powers are similar, where you're not deliberately exercising these psychic powers. They're just kind of channeling through you. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from GameFap. And GameFap says, you were semi-famous in Burma? ? During your time there, were you viewed by the locals as an exotic object because you were a white foreigner? If so, how did you feel? I remember when I visited China a while back, people would want photos of me because I was American. Well, yeah, I lived in some relatively remote areas of Burma where there were few, if any, white people. A lot of the little kids who saw me probably had never seen a white person before. So I was considered to be like rare and exotic to that extent. But I think what really blew them away, what really blew the Burmese Buddhists away, was that I came from America, which to the Burmese is like some sort of deva realm. You know, it's like some kind of paradise where everybody is rich and happy and beautiful and Christian. And they were just honored and vindicated and happy that somebody from this deva realm, you know, this Christian, this rich culture of Christianity, actually rejected his own culture, his own religion, and I never really was a Christian in this life, and then chose to go to their country, live with them in relative poverty, and just reject, go against his family and his friends and everything in order to follow their Dhamma, to follow their religion. They were so proud and just felt just vindicated. It's like, there, you see, this person who left his rich, affluent society and his Christianity, supposedly, and came to our country to live in poverty with us and practice our religion. And I was practicing it more strictly, at a deeper level than most of the Burmese were, including most of the monks, because most of the monks, they really don't have a spiritual calling so much as, they just want to live an easy life and so forth. So, yeah, they were impressed that this foreigner had come and was actually practicing their religion at a deeper level than they were practicing it themselves. Actually like living alone in a forest and not handling money and that kind of thing. So I think that was what really caused them to to be impressed by me. Not just that I was a foreigner, but that I was a foreigner who abandoned my own culture and everything and just came to live with them and practice their religion. That made them very happy. And I remember I'd lived in Burma for maybe a year, and a village doctor told me that the people love me more than they love the abbot of my monastery. And just essentially for the reasons I just explained. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from the Zenithoid. And the Zenithoid says, are the results of bad karma suffering itself, or circumstances that would typically cause an unenlightened being to suffer simply the latent mental energy associated with one's desires not being fulfilled? Numerous enlightened beings still experience the result of their past negative karma in the text, but it did not cause them mental pain. Does this mean that there was technically still mental pain, but it was so far away from and unidentified with the enlightened mind that it was effectively non-existent? Or was that leftover karma just expressing itself in a way that the unenlightened samsaran would typically avoid out of delusion? I go with the latter option, but what do you think? Okay. Well, let's see. Get back up to the top here. Are the results of bad karma suffering itself? No, not really. Or circumstances that would typically cause an unenlightened being to suffer? Yeah, it'd be more like that. Especially, it would be circumstances that would typically cause that being to suffer before he was enlightened. But, I mean, you can say that they still experience mental pain because all pain ultimately is mental. So if they stub their toe, they're going to feel pain in their toe. And that feeling of pain is itself, it's a Vedana, which is a mental state. So that kind of mental pain they would experience, it's just that they wouldn't identify with it. They wouldn't have aversion for the pain, because physical pain, so-called, I mean, it's still a mental state because you're feeling it. But physical pain is not the same as suffering, because the suffering arises from desiring the pain to stop. So an enlightened being presumably would not desire the pain to stop, even if he did feel some kind of pain or sickness or something in the body. And also, I mean, technically it's possible that they could also experience a kind of shadow of emotional pain or something, in that just through force of habit that they have a kind of aversive reaction to something, but they've completely risen above it. They're not identified with that anymore. It's just nature taking its course. So that is kind of a possibility that an enlightened being could still experience some kind of pain or suffering beyond just mere physical pain. But still, I mean, it would just be like the shadow of suffering, because they would no longer be identified with it. They would no longer, I mean, it would just be nature taking its course, and they'd just be observing the whole thing dispassionately at a higher level. That's a possibility. I'm just tossing it out there. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the way it is. But I think the orthodox explanation would be pretty much what Zenithoid here mentioned, where it would just be the arising of circumstances that would have caused suffering before the person was enlightened. But now that they are enlightened, they just accept it. It's no longer a problem because they accept it, and they're not having cravings for the problem to go away or stop or change or anything. So I hope I answered that question, because I'm moving on to the next one. This is from Anthony. And I think this is a BitChute question, so bear that in mind. Anthony said, how many packs of cigarettes did you smoke, and how much whiskey did you drink to get that husky, raspy voice? And the thing is, I can only remember smoking like 1 or 2 cigarettes in my life. And that was when I skipped school in 4th grade with my stepbrother Chucky. And we ganked a pack of cigarettes from my stepdad, his father. And then we skipped school and we hid in this park. There were these trains there. We hid inside this old steam locomotive that was just there on a stand for display. And we smoked cigarettes there. And I didn't even inhale. I really didn't inhale. I'm not just saying that either. And with regard to drinking whiskey, I mean, I drank a fair amount of whiskey, especially like when I was in college. But I mean, I have drunk whiskey since then, but it's really my voice is not caused by cigarettes and whiskey. Sorry to say, I don't want to disappoint Anthony, but I think part of it, I don't think my voice is always this raspy. Like when I'm talking just normally, it's not this raspy. I think part of it is the fact that I'm in front of a camera and there's a certain increased tension, like a certain like constriction of my throat muscles or something that causes increased friction of the vocal cords or something that makes me a little raspier when I'm talking in front of a camera to potentially large numbers of people. Other than that, there's probably a genetic component. My father had kind of a rumbly voice at times. He rumbled. So it could be that too. I do think it's a combination more of just genetics, going with the biological point of view, and just sort of the feeling of being in front of a camera, under the spotlight, so to speak. The spotlight, it just causes a certain amount of physical tension that usually isn't there or something. That like makes my voice a little raspier than usual. And then after I've been talking for 2 or 3 hours straight, then it's just hoarseness at that point. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from Fituska, who memorably asked questions about veterinary euthanasia in the previous Q&A. And now he's saying, what interactions did you have with these Burmese veterinarians? Anything cool or interesting or unusual? Well, the main interactions I've had with Burmese veterinarians were of two kinds. One kind is you just meet with some person who comes to offer food, comes to talk to you, and they just happen to mention that they're a veterinarian. Like I was staying at Mahagande on the big school monastery with the 100 mangy dogs that I mentioned. And I had this dog that had mange. It was the dog that I was feeding it. It adopted me more than I adopted it. It just ate my leftovers. And he told me to use like essentially tiger balm on a mangy dog, and that would cure the mange. So, just casual interactions like that. Although I did stay at a monastery called Migadawan, where the abbot there, he didn't have much use for the human race, but he loved animals, and he always had dogs. And we had this one dog. His name was Po Shot. His English name was President Nignu. And he got all torn up. He got in a fight or something, and like his lower eyelid would just split, and it was just like showing cheek muscles and that kind of thing. So Venerable Uwimala called a vet, and the vet came on a little motor scooter, and the three of us, the vet, Uwimala, and me, did an operation on this dog just as it's lying on the ground. They do house calls. Burmese veterinarians will do house calls. And so he just operated on him. So first they had to give him an injection to knock him out, and then he sewed up his lower eyelid in the cheek there, and then thank you very much, and he drove away on his scooter. And then President Nignu woke up, and he's like walking 6 steps in one direction and falling down, and getting up and walking 6 steps the other direction and falling down. And I was kind of wondering what he was high on. It's like, that the old teenage druggie in me was thinking, man, that looks interesting. Maybe I should try some of that. I also met one elephant vet who, it's just one of those casual meetings where he just mentions that he specializes in elephants, because an elephant vet is much more likely to, I don't know if you're much more likely to meet one. In certain parts of Burma you are, but because villagers, they don't generally go see a doctor even when they're sick. When their dog is sick, they might feed it some kind of herbal remedy that they think might help. But if the dog doesn't get better, they're not going to send it to a vet. They're just going to get a new dog when that one dies. That's just the way it is. But getting back to Migadawan and Uwimala, he had a dog. I think he had a dog spayed, which probably was not good karma for Uwimala. But he had somewhat of a Western point of view. He was probably the most Western in attitude of any Burmese monk I ever met, including Burmese monks that had lived in America for decades. And he just decided he'd rather take the karmic hit by getting this female dog, a hysterectomy than just have her keep having puppies. So again, the vet came and just performed the hysterectomy on the passed out dog lying on the ground. It wasn't exactly a sterile environment. But I mean, those are my main interactions with Burmese veterinarians. So it's nothing really spectacular, nothing really to text home about. So I'm just going to move on to the next questions from Skoladin or Skuladin. And I'm not exactly sure where he's coming from on this one. The first question is, who are the Blue Meanies? And it's my understanding that the Blue Meanies were the cartoon bad guys in the psychedelic Beatles movie, Yellow Submarine. You know, they were like, the Blue Meanies were like the commanders of the Apple Bonkers and the Glovey, you know, the rocket propelled glove, that kind of thing. So they were the bad guys in Yellow Submarine who are ultimately defeated. So that's the answer to that question. But then the second question was Stanley Kubrick trying to warn others about the same people in Dr. Strangelove? And I really don't think Stanley Kubrick had the Blue Meanies from Yellow Submarine in mind at all when he directed Dr. Strangelove. So apparently Skoladin or Skuladin has some other idea about who Blue Meanies are. But with regard to Stanley Kubrick trying to warn others about the same people, Stanley Kubrick, I mean, the main bad guy in Dr. Strangelove was General Jack D. Ripper, who was, you know, just this complete American war hawk with some weird ideas about precious bodily fluids. And then you had Dr. Strangelove himself, who apparently was a German immigrant, a former Nazi, German National Socialist, I should say. And I don't know, Stanley Kubrick trying to warn others about Blue Meanies, or, yeah, I just don't see it. Maybe Skoladin has inside information that I am not privy to. I have not been exposed to this information which links Yellow Submarine with Dr. Strangelove in some meaningful, possibly even profound way. So I'm just going to move to the next question here, which is from Outer Haven. And Outer Haven says, are there any highly regarded transgender Buddhist monks? Well, I don't think there are any transgender Buddhist monks. I mean, that would be disqualifying if you really are transgender. If you're just like effeminate, then you could still get ordained. And there's quite a few effeminate Burmese Buddhist monks, probably quite a few effeminate Thai Buddhist monks also. But if they're genuinely transgender, then they would be like Panduka, and they would just be forbidden to be ordained. Even if the ordination ceremony was conducted, it would still be considered invalid if they really were transgender. Unless, I mean, it's just like a psychological, you know, kind of like effeminacy or something, where they're not behaving like the stereotypical macho Chad. But I have read that there is a Zen monk in Japan who is transgender, who does like makeup tutorials or something on YouTube. How highly regarded he is, I don't know. But in Theravada, which is more conservative, yeah, I'm unaware of there being any transgender Buddhist monks. I mean, you couldn't have like a trans man ordained. I mean, like really, like a biological woman who identifies as a man simply could not be ordained as a monk. And even if they were ordained by some kind of like left-wing activist monks in the West or something, it would still be a completely invalid ordination, and they would still not be ordained because it's just forbidden. It's just not allowed. And to the extent that even if you do the ceremony, it's just dismissed as an invalid ceremony according to the rules themselves. So in that sense, there would be not only no highly regarded transgender Buddhist monks, but no transgender Buddhist monks, period. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is another one that I don't really understand. This is from Master Po saying, why did the perv cross the road? And if this is like a joke, I really don't know what the punchline is. Why did the perv cross the road? Who knows? Maybe there was like a school playground on the other side or something. I don't know. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. And this is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, is it improper to have a Buddha statue in the bathroom where there is a toilet? I don't think it would be any less improper than having one in the bedroom. Well, I guess for starters, I could explain to you how the Burmese do it. Whenever possible, when the Burmese have an altar in their house, they will actually have it built onto the side of the house so that it's sticking out of the house. You know, they'll just have like a square hole in the wall of their house and then just build out this little thing where the altar is going to be, you know, from the inside. You know, it'll just be walls and stuff on the outside. And so because they don't want their altar, which is like a sacred space, kind of defiled by human worldliness of, you know, taking dumps and having sex and, you know, etc. But that's not really much of an option for Westerners. But if you are going to have an altar, like a Buddha statue that, you know, really is like revered, or, you know, it symbolizes, you know, something profound to you, then you really should have it in a place that is a place of honor. You know, like the best place of honor you can find in your house. It might be the living room. It might be like a spare, like a den or a study or something. You know, just have it up on a high place in a room where you're not going to be taking dumps or masturbating or anything like that. But I mean, if it's just an artistic decoration, it's sort of like eating meat. I mean, if you can do it with a completely mindful, clear, peaceful mind, then you're not necessarily doing anything wrong. But yeah, like putting a Buddha statue on the toilet tank, I've seen that before. And yeah, it's probably not the best place to put a Buddha statue. It could be that people are doing like naughty things all through the house, but still, I mean, you should try to have as sacred of a space reserved for your altar as you can manage. But I mean, Joe Doe here didn't even mention an altar. It just mentioned Buddha statue. So yeah, it depends on your own attitude, really. You know, it depends on how you feel doing it. So I think I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is also from Joe Doe, which is, did you ever visit Taung Kalat while in Burma? It looks unreal. And I'm not sure what Taung Kalat is. Taung means hill or mountain in Burmese. Kalat. Huh. Yeah, I'm not sure what Kalat would refer to, and what Kalat mountain or Kalat hill means. I'm not sure. He says it looks unreal. Maybe he's referring to Chaitio Pagoda or something, which looks relatively unreal and is on top of a mountain. But Taung Kalat, yeah. I've heard the word Kalat in Burmese, and I can't recall what it means. But I'm pretty sure I never visited Taung Kalat, even if it's Chaitio, because I never visited Chaitio either. I was never really much into visiting temples and shrines and pagodas and all that. I mean, I've visited a fair amount of them, but it was never really near the top of my list of priorities. So yeah, I don't know what Taung Kalat is. My favorite place to visit in Burma along these lines was, let's see, it was some caves in northwestern Burma. Ooh. Now I can't remember the name of it. Man, there's lots of scroungy monkeys there. That's the main reason why I like going there, because there's these little troops of monkeys, and I just bring like, you know, fruit, like little oranges or bananas or something, and just hand them out to the monkeys, because I really enjoy, you know, I derive joy from feeding scroungy monkeys for some reason. It's like they're my brothers and sisters. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Andrew, who I think maybe I've answered a question from Andrew already, but anyways, Andrew says, would you ever like to revisit Burma one day? There's other places I'd rather visit. I'd rather visit Bali again than Burma. I spent more than 20 years in Burma. I wouldn't want to visit the old places I used to go to because people might start crying when they see that I'm not a monk anymore. Few people might even get like disgusted with me. Maybe it would be like a vacation kind of thing if I was with somebody who actually wanted to go to Burma, you know, and, you know, it's like, can you come with me and show me around? Something like that. Act as my interpreter or something. You know, I might be able to get talked into that someday. Not anytime soon, because I got to work for a living now. But I mean, it's not impossible. Although there are places I would rather go than Burma. Like I'd like to see Italy someday. And like I said, Bali is really nice. It'd be an excellent place to go on a vacation. So I'm just going to move to the next question. This is from Rin Chen. And Rin Chen says, I know you have exhaustively discussed karma and nirvana in your videos, but I would like to discuss it once more. Many prayers in Vajrayana Buddhism beg for liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. They say this is the true glory of the highest bliss. Nirvana is also duality, and it must be transcended too. What do you think of this? Well, it's like the Tibetan Book of the Great Liberation saying that nirvana is just a concept. And what they're getting at is something along the lines of like Madhyamaka, in that the concept of nirvana, which is all we can really deal with, is just as samsaric as the concept of samsara, because concepts are samsaric. So there's this duality of nirvana versus samsara, which does make them extremes. And all these dualities are just papancha and delusion and samsara. So, and really, I mean, in reality, nirvana and samsara are not opposites, you know, any more than substance and form are opposites. Like, I don't know. Let's see. Cup. You know, porcelain and cup are not opposites. You know, they're here, right here in the same cup. The mug, I should say. But they're just not opposites. So, yeah, I think mainly what they're getting at, that samsara and nirvana is like a false dichotomy. And it's just an artifact of perception and delusion, and is purely samsaric. So you just want to get beyond all that. So, yeah, I mean, so long as nirvana is in quotes, so long as nirvana is a concept, then it's also just samsaric duality, because you really cannot grasp what nirvana really is perceptually or intellectually. It just does not work. So any way that you are dealing with nirvana intellectually or perceptually, it's not really nirvana. It's just more samsara. And so you need to leave that behind also. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rin Chen. And is anywhere saying how long I've been talking? Yeah, 2 hours. Gosh. Okay. Rin Chen. His next question is, they also say that karma is illusory, especially Dzogchen and the Mahamudra practitioners. There is no need to purify anything. You just have to integrate all with the base or the ground. This is the work that must be done. Even delusions are manifestations of the primordial wisdom. Does karma really exist if there is no self, no real being? How the actions that produce karma can be considered, since there is not a true identity or entity behind them? Well, ultimately, karma also is just samsaric. You know, it's like an aspect of some of the potential statues contained in an uncarved block of stone. So ultimately, I mean, karma is not an aspect of nirvana. It's not an aspect of ultimate reality. It's just a samsaric phenomenon. So to the extent that you transcend samsara, you transcend karma also. So, yeah, and then you got some of the Tibetan Buddhists saying there's no need to purify anything. You just have to integrate all with the base or the ground. Well, you don't have to even do that. I mean, you don't have to do anything. But, yeah, I can kind of understand that. It's somewhat along the lines of my whole theory of, you know, the uncarved block of stone with the infinite number of statues inside, just in potential or conditional form. I mean, even if you become enlightened and transcend the particular statue you happen to be and just merge with the block of stone, nothing changes, because that block of stone will continue to have every single possible statue in virtual or potential or conditional form contained within it, including the unenlightened you. So it's really just a paradox. It's a mind warper. You can't really understand it like intellectually. So even delusions are manifestations of primordial wisdom. I wouldn't go that far. It's just, it's just all necessarily contained in the uncarved block of stone. And nothing can make those potential statues go away. They're always going to be there. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Siovak and Sipat Zidina, who says, I've seen you mention many times that things aren't real and only virtual because of dependent origination, but this doesn't make any sense to me. Why is something not real virtual if it arises due to a cause? To me, it seems the opposite, where things are only real if they can have a causal effect on other things, which is the classical Indian philosophical position. For example, if someone stabs you, the knife causes pain and damages the body, but a box imagined in the mind is not real because it has no causal effects on other things. Well, let's see, where do I start on this? First of all, let's see. Why is something not real or virtual if it arises due to a cause? Because it is arising due to a not real virtual cause. I mean, that's the quick, easy answer right there. Something is not real or virtual if it arises due to a cause that is also not real and virtual. And then that cause itself is caused by other causes that are also not real and virtual. But ultimately, dependent co-arising is not due to a cause and effect kind of relationship. That's what a lot of Buddhists believe, but it's almost more of a logical thing. If it's like a conditional logic, if this is seen to exist, then this other thing is also seen to exist. So, like in Schopenhauer's philosophy, he had the fourfold root of sufficient reason. One of the roots of sufficient reason was cause and effect, but he also had like logical sufficient reason, and that would come closer to dependent co-arising, I think. I mean, unless if you acknowledge that the causes and effects are both not ultimately real. I mean, it's kind of strange that Siovak and Sipat Zidina would think that something is not real if it arises from a cause, and he's just assuming that the cause is real. But the cause is just as unreal or virtual as the effect. So, this whole question kind of reminds me of F.H. Bradley's philosophy. And I started reading F.H. Bradley because there's an eccentric English monk named Nanavira who lived in Ceylon back in the 50s and first half of the 60s, who was really into F.H. Bradley. And so I started reading F.H. Bradley, including his, what is it? It's back there on the bookcase. It's not his logic, appearance and illusion or something like that. Appearance and reality. That's the name of the book. And he came to this weird idea that the more real something is the more internal causes of its existence. Like the causes of its existence are more internal. So it's like causing itself. And so F.H. Bradley said that something is more real if it has more of its causes for itself contained within itself so that it's self-generating. And then from that, he came to the really strange idea that the bigger something is, the more real it is. Because the bigger something it is, the more likely it is that at least some of the causes for it are going to be self-contained, which is just kind of a strange idea. So, yeah, I mean, the quick, easy answer to this question, why is something not real or virtual if it arises due to a cause? Because the cause also is not real and virtual. The entire samsaric web of phenomena is not real and virtual, but it's sort of self-conditioning or like mutually conditioning. It's co-arising. So, yeah, I do not see dependent co-arising as a linear sequence of cause and effect. Like Nanavira used to say, I mean, it says this arising, that arises, not this ceasing, that arises. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Creel. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Creel or Creel says, what are your thoughts on the life and figure of Michael Jackson from your Buddhist, spiritual, or otherwise human perspective? Well, from a Buddhist perspective, I think the most significant thing I could say about Michael Jackson is that he is proof that being rich and famous and glamorous does not make you a happy person. Not necessarily, because Michael Jackson was rich and famous and glamorous, and he seemed to be sort of a messed up, unhappy person. So there you go. I mean, he was rich and famous and glamorous, and I mean, he had some sort of dysmorphia, I guess, where he just kept having like cosmetic surgery done on him until finally he looked like a male, female, black, white human elf. And then there's all these, I mean, he was on drugs. I mean, he died of a drug overdose. There's, rumors, at least accusations of him messing around with little kids, that kind of thing. And so I think that's the main takeaway from a Buddhist point of view, is he's just showing as like empirical evidence that just being rich and famous and glamorous is no guarantee whatsoever that you're going to be happy, which pretty much shoots in the head most theories of economists who just seem to equate happiness and well-being with a high standard of living. So what else can I say about Michael Jackson? I mean, I guess you could say his past experiences, which would be like his karma, were helping to determine his unhappiness. I mean, he was raised in a family where he had practically no childhood. That might have something to do with it, something to do with sort of the dysfunction of his later years. But I guess what I've already said is like the main takeaway. So I mean, I was never much into Michael Jackson anyway. I hear him on the radio sometimes when I'm driving in my car, but aside from that, I really don't think much about him. But yeah, he's definitely really solid evidence that a rich, famous, glamorous person is not necessarily going to be any happier because of it. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Rui. And Rui says, would you care to comment from a Theravadan perspective on chapter 25? Oh yeah, I already answered this one because he put it in the chat too. And in parentheses here, I've got Fez, just reminding me to put the Fez on when I answer that question. So I'm just going to move on to the next one, which is from Bilgahan. And Bilgahan says, what would be the karma of a certain tribe of people who's committed crimes against humanity for thousands of years? Even their religion is built on lying and deceit, theft and murder. I wonder, how could they even be born as human with such karma? Could they be spillover of hell beings onto the human realm? Well, I'm not even going to hazard a guess as to who he's referring to here. But there have been many tribes of people that have caused all sorts of mayhem. The Germanic people, for example, I mean, they were like the arch villains of Western civilization for centuries and centuries, continually invading and pillaging the Roman Empire and, being like instrumentally involved in numerous wars, including the 2 world wars. But I mean, there is no tribal karma, really. I mean, there is kind of a group karma in that you're going to be reborn with people with karma similar to yours. So people that are like part of the same culture in a way that's kind of similar karma that's combining them, but in a way it's kind of an illusion. It's sort of like the controversy in evolutionary biology of whether groups can evolve or not, or whether it's just the individual, and then it just creates an illusion of group evolution. It's kind of similar here, but in Buddhism, there is only individual karma. Karma is a mental state. It's an individual mental state. And, but nevertheless, if you have a certain kind of karma, you're probably going to be reborn in a society with people that have similar karma to you. And so, I mean, there's that kind of like a quasi group karma. But I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. People belonging to a tribe with a bad reputation who turn out to be very wise, saintly people. So, and then the lying and deceit part, I mean, gosh, I don't know where to even, I mean, a lot of what people consider to be lies is just stuff that it turns out not to be true, and then they don't give the person the benefit of the doubt, or they just assume that anything that isn't true is a lie. And really, I mean, I'm even nitpicking with people in comment sections, like on Breitbart, where they'll say somebody's a complete liar, and really, I mean, if just because you say something that isn't true doesn't mean that you're a liar. It may be that you're just mistaken. You may be making an honest mistake. You may believe that that is true. You assert it is true, and then somebody calls you a liar because it turns out that empirically, objectively, it's not true. So there is that. I mean, I shouldn't probably even bring up examples of wise people, wise good people from a tribe with a bad reputation, just because then I might be singling out and identifying some tribe that, and I don't know. So let's see here. Theft and murder. I wonder how they could even be born as human with such karma. Well, there's always reasons. I mean, the main reason is that most of these people probably are not all bad. So, could there be a spillover of hell beings into the human realm? Well, there's always going to be a trickle of that. Also a trickle of other realms into the human realm. But it's never going to be like a huge movement of an entire ethnicity, I'm pretty sure. So I kind of sort of answered that question, but it was deliberately asked in a vague way so as not to like out themselves with regard to being opposed to some specific ethnicity. And I'm not going to even guess, because even if I guess correctly with regard to who he's referring to, then, it sort of make me look like I was agreeing or something, but let's just move on to the next question here. This is from Mary, and I'm not even counting how many questions some people have already asked. Let's just assume he has asked no more than 3 already, or no more than 2. So he says, how to get rid of the violent thoughts I have towards my mother and sisters. 20 years of bullying from my mother and 20 years of not noticing it from my sisters. And now when all the legal inheritance stuff is over, I have these violent thoughts. Well, that's kind of a tough question. And I may not be the best person to ask this question to, because I haven't experienced anything similar to this. Like my parents love me and I was raised well, as far as I can tell. And so, I mean, I don't have a personal experience along the same lines that I can really relate to. But, I mean, going with Buddhist philosophy, the obvious thing to do would be send metta, just do like a metta meditation practice where you're literally, emanating or beaming metta towards the people that you're having the difficulties with, like, I guess, your mother and your sisters. And if that's just too difficult, then you can slowly ease into it. There are various ways of slowly easing in to sending metta to somebody that you just don't like. You might start with somebody who's just sort of a neutral person, and then you get better at sending metta to the neutral person. Then you can pick a somewhat more problematic person until you get good at that. And then finally you get to the arch enemy nemesis person. Or also, it's in my book, Buddhist Ethics, Buddhist Practice, I think, where it's talking about the pebble method that was devised by some Burmese Sayadaw, where the person you want to send metta to is just too difficult. You just find this little round pebble and you name it the name of the person that is the problematic person, and then you put that little pebble in a little tumbler of clear water, and you put it up on your altar, and you just beam love at the pebble, and then it sort of indirectly deflects over onto the other person. And every day, you change its water very mindfully and maybe even lovingly, and you send metta through that pebble. But if you want the full details, I guess you'll have to read the book, which is just shameless like marketing on my part. So I'm just going to move to the next question. This is from Bodhisattva 969, who I'm pretty sure has already asked more than 3 questions, because he's also goes by a different name in the chat. But I'm just doing it. I'm answering this question, damn it. Do you know Ajan Amaro? I like listening to him. He seems to be a friendly, kind-hearted man. And I can't really say that I know Ajan Amaro. I know who he is, and I met him once. I had been a monk probably for less than a year at that time, so it was well over 30 years ago. And he came to the monastery where I was, and we had a little bit of a talk and with some other monks there. Also 2 nuns who weren't bhikkhunis. They were just, the standard old school Ajahn Chah nun. And we had a nice talk. And yeah, he has a nice smile. He seems like a kind-hearted person. He doesn't really strike me as a forest monk, though. At least back, 30 years ago, he was starting up the, what is it? Why can't I remember the name? Abhayagiri forest monastery. But he was like a city boy, and he had like these city ideas of how to set up a forest monastery, so that it was all mostly just unused wilderness, and everybody's just clumped together in this bustling little center of activity. But I really don't hold that against him. He seems to be a good and wise, serious monk. So, but I don't know him personally, other than just having met him once a long time ago. He probably doesn't remember me at all. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And Romeo says, I am on the email contact list for several Buddhist-flavored websites. The other day, I opened up an email that had an invite to an event entitled Save Democracy, Compassionate Activism for November and Beyond, which will host the likes of Jack Cornfield, why am I not surprised, and Tara Brock as speakers, and is sponsored by Democratic Senator Cory Booker. If you were to go by what seems to be the majority of Buddhists in the US, you would get the impression that the Buddha was some sort of proto-Marxist. I sometimes rack my brain in trying to get to the root of where they get this from. The only thing I can come up with is that they conflate the Buddhist values of compassion for others as an endorsement for left-wing concepts like taking from the rich and giving to the poor, or liberating the oppressed. My first question is, 1. Exactly where does the left's political notion of Buddhism stem from? Are there sutras or texts that I am not aware of where the Buddha took a stand politically and or gave his opinion on the ideal government? Is there any basis for their contention that Buddhism is somehow related to leftism in either the sutras or how the Buddha conducted his life? Well, the only political sutta I can think of, I'm sure there's more than one, but I think it's in the Digha Nikaya, where the Buddha does say that theft is caused by poverty, and that a good king should provide farmers with like seed grain and all the stuff they need to get a good farm going in order to promote the prosperity of the society and reduce the crime, because there will be less people like who have to resort to crime because they don't have enough food or whatever. And also, I mean, there are certain aspects of Buddhism that could be considered leftist, like, the wiser you are, the less I, me, mine you have, which, I mean, identity politics, I mean, just flies completely in the face of that. But still, the old-fashioned communistic idea of no personal property, it kind of is a leftist idea of, you consider nothing to be your own, although even a monk was allowed to have personal property. At least he had his 3 robes and his bowl and his needle case, his water filter, his razor, his belt. He had some stuff. I mean, even a monk could own personal property. So, I mean, the real answer to this question is that Buddhism doesn't have to have anything to do with leftism. That leftists are going to just transmogrify any spiritual system into essentially religious flavored Marxism. You know, like Christianity, they've done the same thing with Christianity, which, I mean, some aspects of Christianity, like if you read the Acts of the Apostles in the New Testament, it was like a voluntary communism, the way the apostles in Jerusalem were living, where they'd pool all their resources and then distribute it according to need, that kind of thing. That's communism. But with regard to like homosexuality, the New Testament clearly states that homosexuality is abomination. And then the Old Testament says homosexuals should simply be taken out and killed. But you got Christian churches that are run by leftists flying the rainbow flag now. You know, they are celebrating abomination. So it's just a matter of the left, certain leftist activists, or just the left in general. You know, they're just trying to take over pretty much whatever they can take over, and then just turning it into some sort of, you know, crypto Marxism. So, I mean, there are some ideas in Buddhism that are friendly to a leftist approach, but some of them are like the opposite. You know, like leftism nowadays, it's like grievance politics, where the whole thing is you blame some oppressor, mainly white patriarchal men, for all of your problems. And then you try to fix those problems by, you know, doing something about the patriarchy or whatever. And that's just essentially the opposite of genuine Dhamma, where all suffering is ultimately self-inflicted. You know, they just reject things like karma because that makes the victim at fault. It's victim blaming. So, I mean, the actual position of these religions is irrelevant. I mean, the leftists are going to try and take it over anyway. I'm sure you've got leftist Muslim, you know, you've got like, probably there's at least one mosque in the West somewhere flying a rainbow flag. So, yeah, I mean, Buddhism doesn't necessarily have to have any Marxist elements, but Marxists, to the extent that they're able, are going to just sort of like absorb it and turn it into just another flavor of Marxism. So, I guess I've answered that question. I guess. So I'm just going to move on to, let's see, Romeo's next question here, which is his second question, you might say. My second question comes in light of the upcoming presidential election. If you could speculate, where would the Buddha fall on the political spectrum if he were living in the US of 2024? Would he stand with leftists that have Trump derangement syndrome? I'm guessing he would be dispassionate and not even take a stand and vote at all. What do you think? Well, if you read the old text, talking about politics is called animal talk. It's what Tirachana Kata, animal talk. You know, talking about like government ministers and kings and wars and all that. So essentially politics. Yeah, I mean, you just don't get involved in that. So in that sense, you know, the Buddha would not vote probably. You know, there wouldn't be any political debates going on in the monasteries. Let's see. I do think he would be largely libertarian, which, I mean, the left claims, you know, like anarcho-communists or something, you know, they might claim to be somewhat libertarian, but really communism just doesn't work that way. It has to be enforced at gunpoint because it's so at odds with human nature, which is the very existence of human nature is denied by the left. So let's see. So I mean, obviously Trump wouldn't have or the Buddha wouldn't have Trump derangement syndrome. He wouldn't have any kind of derangement syndrome. You know, he wouldn't be vehemently opposed to either side. So, yeah, if he were to like take a position at all, I think like if there was an election, he would just look at the two candidates and decide which person is the more virtuous, honest, upstanding person, regardless of their political party. And who knows? I mean, I don't think that even an enlightened being, I mean, if you had to choose between Biden and Trump, I mean, Biden obviously is just feeble and senile and incapable of performing the function of president. But then again, maybe the Buddha would just say, well, his advisors maybe, but I mean, Biden's advisors don't seem to be much wiser than Biden is. So, yeah, I mean, first of all, that the Buddha would just not encourage any kind of involvement in politics to anyone who is sincerely trying to transcend samsara. There's very few things in this world more samsaric than politics. So he would just, go out into the forest and meditate, go to your cell and meditate. Don't bother with reading the news about politics. It's just all samsara. It's all delusion anyway. But if there was any kind of involvement in politics, I assume that he would just, favor the lesser of two evils, and just with regard to just comparing the moral character of the two people. And unlike what most Democrats say, Trump really is not the moral inferior of Biden. I mean, they've done so many the fishing expeditions trying to get him on anything. And at the end, they couldn't find him guilty or likely guilty of any serious crime. So they just had to invent new crimes. And we all know how that turned out. Whereas Biden himself has bragged publicly of worse than they've accused Trump of. He's 10% for the big guy too. He's pretty obviously been peddling, influence, or at least his son Hunter has been peddling his daddy's access to his daddy, with Biden himself allegedly, apparently, skimming 10% off the top. Nothing. It's crickets. Although maybe now that the leftist media are turning against Biden in desperation, that maybe that kind of stuff will make headlines finally after many years. But I think I've already answered that question, sort of, kind of. It's hard to predict what an enlightened being would do. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Brahman Chud. And Brahman Chud says, this is a Hinduism question. Should I avoid visiting ISKCON due to its sketchy history, and to avoid Starbucks Hindis to visit a more traditional temple? Are there tips for good etiquette? I get taking off the shoes and show respect to obeisances, but I am curious about idiosyncrasies that could be unintentionally offenses. Well, I really don't know that much about modern Western Hinduism. I really just have not traveled in those circles. I don't know what ISKCON is, for example. Maybe I've heard of it before, but whether Brahman Chud should avoid visiting ISKCON due to its sketchy history and to avoid Starbucks Hindis, I really don't know, because I just don't know what ISKCON is. I have no familiarity with it. I'm not sure what he's referring to. It sounds like some kind of place. But to visit a more traditional temple, I mean, you might as well, if it's more traditional and you want genuine Hinduism and not rainbow Western Hinduism, then yeah, it makes sense that you go to a more traditional temple. And are there tips for good etiquette? And really, I'm no authority on Hindu religious etiquette, because I'm just not a Hindu. And I mean, I know what the standard North Indian etiquette was in the Buddhist time, but I have no idea how that applies to the 21st century. So I really am not in a position to answer this very well, other than if you prefer traditional Hinduism, you'd be better off going to a traditional temple. And if you're not sure what to do, just look around and see what the other people are doing and just imitate them, which is advice that I give to people visiting an Asian Buddhist monastery for the first time too. It's just, if you're not sure what to do, just watch what the other people are doing and just imitate that. So I kind of answered that question. I'm going to move on to the next one. This is from Pyramid. And Pyramid says, my question is, if I create a mini figure of the Venerable pannobhasa, place it on my altar, venerate it with incense, and say 10 Hail Brians, almost said Heil there, I did say Heil there, didn't I? And say 10 Hail Brians every night before sleep, would that help raise my karma level Well, again, karma is not a matter of outward conduct. It's a matter of mental states. So if you have more exalted mental states from doing that or something else, then yeah, I mean, you can do that. But I mean, if it's just like silabata paramasa, you just, adhering to rules and rituals just because, it's just giving some kind of religious structure, it might not help very much at all. It could actually be detrimental if you cling to it. So with regard to minifigures of Venerable Pannobhasa, I mean, probably be better off just printing a picture. That's what people would do in Burma. That, they just, their favorite religious figures, if there wasn't a convenient statue to be had of that person, they just get a photograph or something and put that on their altar. Not that I am in any way recommending that anybody start worshiping me, except for my woman. So, yeah, I guess I answered that question. And that technically was the last question on my list. There's like a non-question from Mama, who submitted her non-question just shortly before the video started, or the live stream, because we're live from South Carolina. It's Q&A. So anyways, Mama says, I want to thank you for all of the things you've taught me. It has helped my life so much. I am sending you a $100 Cash App to help celebrate your 100th Q&A. Sorry I can't be here live today because I'm having a painting class or something. So, yeah, thank you, Mama. That's very nice. And I'm going to go back and see if the chat has added a whole bunch of new questions. Okay, got to scroll up. Let's see, still scrolling upwards with the tiny print here. Okay, yeah, I'm still scrolling. Let's see, still scrolling upwards. We still got questions here. Let's see. Gosh. Yeah, I think we might be here for a while. Okay, wait a minute. I think I might have found it. Oh, no. Still scrolling upwards. Oh, okay. Shaka goes to ask what was Shinola. I answered that one. Okay. Yeah, I answered the karmic dispositions question. So let's see. Okay, Cool Whip says, wait, on the show with no name, that when a question related to Majamaka is asked, the Fez is needed to answer. Okay. Yeah, that's nice. People answering each other's questions. I can just sit back, I'll just sit here and have a beverage while people in the chat answer each other's questions. Yeah, the Buddha box in South Park, I already answered that one. The 22 years old one, feeling old already. Let's see. The knee question that I never understood. Hugs from Brazil. Yeah, first hugs I've ever received from Brazil. Okay, let's see. The knee of listening. Okay, let's see here. Oh, that's a good answer. Chakra Gosa said to the guy who was 22 years old and wanting to slow down time, the key to slowing down time is to suffer more intensely. Seconds can seem like hours. Yeah, you sit on a hot stove, 5 minutes can seem like an hour. Let's see. Well, gosh, wait, here's a question mark. Let's see, Pranav. Mr. Pranav says, I've heard that some people, after doing few Vipassana courses, stop doing Vandana. Oh, okay. Going to monastery, visiting monks, thinking it's not important to spirituality and enlightenment. What do you think? Okay. So Vandana is like paying respects. It's like physically doing obeisance or revering a holy man. So Mr. Pranav says, I've heard that some people, after doing few Vipassana courses, stop doing Vandana, going to the monastery, visiting monks, thinking it's not important to spirituality and enlightenment. What do you think? Well, a lot of Western people might think that just because, they think, well, what I'm doing now is really like serious, profound, important stuff, and the other stuff was kind of superficial. So I'll just go with this and just kind of ignore what the texts say about how it's a great blessing to meet with holy men and, paying respect to monks and offering things to monks and so forth. Also, like the Goenka people, a lot of them are just convinced that the Goenka method is just the royal road to enlightenment, and you don't need to do anything other than the Goenka method. You know, they're sort of like the Jehovah's Witnesses of Buddhism, and I think I may have just offended any number of Goenka practitioners, even though, I mean, I'm not opposed to the Goenka method or anything, and I have to give credit to the Goenka practitioners in that they really put emphasis on keeping 5 precepts, unlike, you know, the standard like boomer Theravada Dhamma, where they call themselves Sangha, and they might not even keep 5 precepts. They just come there and meditate once a week or something. So yeah, I think even if you're doing Vipassana, it's still a good idea, especially if you're doing it before, of paying respects to the monks and you know, making offerings and just doing the rest of the Buddhist stuff. I mean, it's not like doing Vipassana meditation is like a replacement for everything else. So, I mean, you should try to have a well-balanced spiritual practice. A lot of Westerners, they only have interest in like 1 or 2 things, just like sitting in meditation. A lot of Western people who call themselves Buddhists, pretty much all they do is just meditate. And, you know, they don't really bother with much of anything else. They might read some books, that kind of thing. But it's sort of like I was mentioning like well over an hour ago. We've already been at this for 2 hours and 45 minutes, but that includes like minutes of me just trying to figure out how to do the live stream. What was I going to say? I just distracted myself. Oh yeah, it's like you can purify your mind, but your body isn't purified, then that can cause problems. It's like you're burning too bright. You got too much voltage or too many amps or something going through a system that isn't developed for it. Then yoga puts a lot of emphasis on that, for example, of keeping your body pure at the same rate, you know, you purify your body at the same rate as you're purifying your mind, or maybe even purify the body first so that it'll be capable of receiving, you know, the increased energy flowing through your system, that kind of thing. So yeah, there is that. I mean, you don't want a lopsided spiritual practice. You do want to kind of bring the whole system forwards at the same time. And so yeah, doing Vipassana courses is not just a substitute for everything else in Buddhism. And so I'm just going to move to the next question here. This has got a question mark, so this is a question. You can always tell a question because they've got a question mark at the end. This is from Wilson. A few episodes ago, you said Buddhism had no concept of the unconscious mind. Wouldn't an unconscious mind just be what an unenlightened person has, whereas an enlightened person would be aware? Well, I was referring to like the subconscious mind, like in the Freudian sense or the Jungian sense. You know, it's the level... There's like a level of mind below the conscious ego level that's going ahead and doing its own stuff without the conscious ego level being aware of it. That's what I was referring to. So, I mean, you could say that a person who is not fully awake is like semi-conscious, obviously, like a sleepwalker or something. But yeah, unconscious is a misnomer. It's not a very good term. Subconscious would be better. Yeah, and I was really referring to, like, you know, Western psychology, referring to the subconscious mind that causes like hysterical symptoms and other neuroses. So yeah, Wilson next has an unsmiley face. And then we got, okay, ZYX. Sorry, I hope I didn't offend you by accidentally starting to call you XYZ, who could be somebody in your neighborhood that you really don't like. So ZYX says, if God's Saka came down to earth and meet you saying, Panyo, you need to live alone in rest of your life in forest as a recluse, then you will die as Arahant. In that case, will you leave your life? Well, I mean, if I have some deity in blazing glory coming down from heaven with like a retinue, you know, he's riding his royal elephant or something, and he's telling me to do that, then, I mean, I'd have to at least consider it, but I am rather partial to my sweetie at present. But I mean, I don't really think that Saka, King of Gods, is going to take time out of his busy schedule just to come down and tell me to renounce the world. So, do I leave my life? Yeah, I mean, you can't really leave your life because no matter where you go, there you are. To quote Buckaroo Banzai. So, yeah, well, if Saka, King of Gods, comes down out of heaven in blazing glory and admonishes me, I'll at least listen to what he has to say. I'll go that far. And with that, I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Hirin Cthulhu. What would your father think of your association with Brian Rue? I think my dad would like Brian. I think they'd get along great. Because my father was kind of similar to Brian Rue in certain ways. Although my father was no German National Socialist. He fought in World War II against the Germans. And he felt strongly about that. But with regard to Brian Rue's just general eccentricity, he and my father they would have gotten along marvelously, famously. So let's see here. I'll just move on to the next question here. Someone's telling me I should be able to open chat in a separate page. I'm not going to try and mess with anything right now, though. I suppose I could experiment with it, which is just going to like turn off the live stream again or something. So this is good enough. You're just going to have to deal with looking up my nose when I'm reading these. Okay, Mr. Pranav is, he's going to bed. So, okay. Good night, Pranav. Mr. Pranav. Sweet dreams. And El Gato, yeah, no question there. Okay, no question there. Okay, we got a question mark. Shakragosa, who is, I think he's already asked more than one question here. But this is kind of a special occasion. This is the 100th Q&A, so I guess I can not be so much of a hard ass on this one. So Shakragosha says, I just can't accept this idea that it's my fault whether something's a problem or not. This is bad. Could you give a different teaching on the same subject, contradicting your previous teaching? Oh, I get it. It's like a joke question, isn't it? Oh, Shakragosha, you joker. So, yeah, I could theoretically give a different teaching on the same subject, contradicting the previous teaching, but I shouldn't do it so quickly after, I should at least give a pretense of, I've matured over the past several days and I've come to a different understanding of things. So let's see here. No question mark. Yeah, no question mark there. Well, here's a question mark, but somebody's asking somebody else in the chat a question, so I don't have to answer those. Let's see. Okay, Lucid says, do you purposely always start your videos with Brian by saying, yeah, hail Brian, and ending them with, yeah, you're welcome? Or is that all just a happy coincidence? Well, it's probably like a habit at this point. So it just comes out spontaneously without me having to decide to say it. I did some videos with Brian yesterday that are in the can. They'll be coming up over the next several days where I consciously didn't say yeah before saying hail Brian. So you've got that to look forward to. You can look forward to me not saying yeah, which I'm sure is going to have you all excited. And I might still have said, yeah, you're welcome at the end, though. And it's not really a total coincidence. It's just, you just get into the habit of saying the same thing. Sort of like Styx, Hexenhammer 666. He always starts off the same and always ends the same. So let's see. Okay. Okay, so we got M. M says, your opinion on Venerable Nanavira and his writing notes on the Dhamma. Well, I would say that his letters are way more interesting reading than notes on the Dhamma. Notes on Dhamma. Venerable Nanavira, he was, an Englishman who was friends with Venerable Nanamoli, the first famous Nanamoli, not the recent famous Nanamoli. And they went to Ceylon together. I guess they were originally going to be ordained in Tibet. And then the Chinese invaded Tibet, so they switched plans to Ceylon. Although I've also read that Nanavira converted to Buddhism after reading Julius Evola's book about Buddhism while he was sick in a hospital in Italy. He was very intellectual. He was very much influenced by existentialist philosophy. You know, he considered Dhamma to be like an improvement on existentialism. The existentialists always get to this dead end, and it's like they don't know how to progress any farther. Some of them will then just abandon existentialism in favor of mysticism, like what was his name? Carl Jaspers supposedly did. Nanavira, he had this really complicated explanation of pretty much everything. And he started off with this weird idea that, I mean, he rejected Abhidhamma, he rejected pretty much all of the texts that are not called core texts. But with regard to all the rest of it, Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, and Anguttara Nikaya, some of the Khuddaka Nikaya, and also most of Vinaya, he just accepted that as absolutely 100% just Buddha Vachana, genuine teachings of Gautama Buddha, just without question, just completely disregarding, you know, the talking animal stories and the flat earth and all that are contained even in the core texts. And then he used that as just sort of like a starting point of axioms to build up this extremely complicated, like super existentialist philosophy, where a frog would have to be an intellectual in order to manage being unenlightened, according to his point of view. And then he, while doing walking meditation and just like cogitating ferociously, he apparently became a Sotapanna. Or in his own opinion, he became a Sotapanna, became very arrogant, just stopped communicating with Venerable Nanamoli, who they'd been friends for years. He just broke off communication because they were no longer in a standing of parity. You know, they were no longer equals because Nanavira was so far beyond him and so forth. And so it could be to your benefit to read Notes on Dhamma just to understand this weird interpretation of Dhamma. I mean, he wasn't entirely foolish, or it certainly wasn't stupid. So you can pick up little tidbits of stuff. That he's got a lot more followers now than he had when he was alive. There are a lot of intellectual Western monks who are fanboys of Nanavira to this day. Let's see. But still, I mean, his letters were way more readable and interesting than his Notes on Dhamma. And some books that contain Notes on Dhamma will also contain his collected letters. But he was very intellectually arrogant, and he had absolutely no use at all for mysticism. And I consider Theravada, early Buddhism, to have been just like mysticism par excellence, just like the purification and, you know, perfection as far as, you know, any worldly system can be perfected of mysticism. And he just absolutely hated that he just thought that violates the Aristotelian laws of thought, that a mystic will say, you know, the truth is A and not A, which is just abomination to him. So I had one of these followers of Nanavira read my first blog when I first came back to America in like 2011, 12. And, you know, he was really intrigued by what I was writing, asked me if I was like a follower of Nanavira also. And he was like supporting me, trying to get my writings published and everything. And then one of the very first blog posts I came out with after that was essentially criticizing Nanavira and explaining why I figured why I considered him to be like grossly mistaken with regard to mysticism especially. And then that was just a total embarrassment to this European monk and his friends, and, you know, the organization that was based on Nanavira's teachings that were going to publish my writings and so forth. You know, it was just, in a way, it was just natural, inevitable self-sabotage on my part, because I had been planning on writing that article long before I ever started the blog. It was just one of the first blog posts that came out on the old blog, and it's now incorporated into one of my books. I think it might be, gosh, I don't remember which book it's in. So I guess that's a long answer to this very short question. And so I'll just move on to M's next question, which is, and I practice shikantaza in the tradition of Soto Zen twice a day for 30 minutes. Is it healing from the Theravada perspective? And is it considered meditation in the traditional Orthodox sense? Well, it's my understanding that shikantaza is, certainly it's not against Theravada Buddhism. And there's different methods of meditation included in Theravada Buddhism, including one in the commentaries, the story of Potila. I've mentioned this before, where the enlightened boy novice is instructing the venerable Potila on how to meditate. And he compares the body to a termite mound with 6 holes, and there's a lizard inside the termite mound. You want to catch that lizard. So you just block off 5 of the holes, and you just watch intently the 6th hole. So when the lizard comes out, you catch it. And that could be a reasonable way of explaining shikantaza, where you're just like watching the mind intently, waiting for a thought to arise, or maybe not even waiting. You're just like sitting there empty, wide awake, It's kind of hard for me to put into words. I haven't really studied up on Zen meditation techniques very much. I'm more familiar with Theravadan ones. But I do think that shikantaza definitely is compatible with early Theravada, Orthodox Theravada. So it's certainly considered meditation in the traditional Orthodox sense. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. Grasshopper says, greetings, pannobhasa. Yeah, greetings to you, Grasshopper, which I think is the same as Master Po, which is kind of contradictory. Let's see. Oh, he answers his own riddle here. Why did the perv cross the road? He's stuck to the chicken. Gosh. Yeah, chicken crossing the road jokes are they've been going around for quite a while. Since they invented chickens, probably. Let's see. Okay, Cool Whip asking a 4th question, and he's actually got the number 4 there, just shamelessly admitting to asking a 4th question. If a man has a vasectomy, does he become a eunuch? No, he does not. Even though he's shooting blanks, he's still got the family jewels intact, and he's still producing testosterone, because that's what the family jewels do, among other things, is they secrete testosterone. So yeah, a man with a vasectomy, he's shooting blanks, but he's still intact. It's just that he's got the vas deferens tubes severed and tied off so that the sperm ducts aren't sending sperms all the way to the end of the pee-pee. So let's see. More questions here. You should do a Buddhist perspective of all other religions. Yeah, I've done a Buddhist perspective of some religions. Yeah, in fact, NPC number 6 down here is saying that I did a series with Venerable Punadhammo last year. I did a Buddhist perspective of like a Theravada Buddhist perspective of Theravada or Mahayana Buddhism, Hinduism, and atheism especially. I think also Christianity. We didn't really talk about Islam or some of the more obscure religious systems yet. So let's see. So, please give me free seed grain. Only you can prevent me from switching to a life of crime. Yeah, I think that was maybe somewhat of a naive idea that crime is necessarily caused by poverty. In some cases, especially if we assume that it is more likely in ancient India, then yeah, but I think the worst crimes, at least the most overall harmful crimes, are committed by the people in power. So let's see here. Robin's nest. Is there question marks here? That is the question. From the standpoint, who is a Mahayana sect? Who is in a Mahayana sect? Do you think this concept of offensive and should be altered? Okay, so hello, pannobhasa. There has been a lot of controversy into antiquity with Mahayana calling Theravada and other non-Mahayana schools as part of the lesser vehicle. Yeah, Hinayana. I mean, literally means like deficient vehicle. Hina is like a past participle of, I think it's hayadit, which means to lose, to squander, to fritter away. And so the Hinayana is essentially the deficient vehicle. So anyways, getting back to Robin's Nest question here, from their standpoint and from the standpoint who is in a Mahayana sect, do you think this concept is offensive and should be altered? Well, a wise Theravadan wouldn't be offended, because whether you're offended or not is really a matter of your own wisdom or foolishness. So, the more polite way of referring to it would be Shravakayana, which is the vehicle of the disciples. So that would be the more polite way of referring to pre-Mahayana Buddhism. Instead of calling it Hinayana, or the deficient vehicle, you call it Shravakayana, or the vehicle of the disciples, which sounds nicer, I guess. Or you could just call it pre-Mahayana Buddhism, but then again, a lot of Mahayana Buddhists think that Mahayana went all the way back to the time of the Buddha, in which case you couldn't have pre-Mahayana, unless it was Buddhism before the Buddha did the first Zen transmission of twirling the flower, where only Mahakassapa got it. So, let's see here. Looking for more question marks. See, I'm skipping over a lot of what people are saying here because there's no question marks. Let's see. Oh yeah, that is a good point. White Ash Piper points out that politically, the Buddha certainly would have been pro-life. He would not have been pro-choice. So he'd be dogpiled by other leftists if he did adopt some leftist position and was like adopted by the left as an honorary member. Yeah, he'd be like J.K. Rowling or something. Let's see here. Oh yeah, we got somebody else already saying Shravakayana here. So let's see. Mary J is defending himself by pointing out that he only asked one question about the fish tank. Oh yeah, plus also violent thoughts about his family. Let's see. More question marks. See, I'm scrolling down all these comments that were made while I was reading the standard list of questions. Yeah, there's definitely going to be at least one loach in my aquarium. You got to have the Derbis feeders at the bottom eating the detritus and stuff. Let's see. Okay, question marks. Yeah, most of these aren't question marks. Okay, here we go. One from M. Why is there something rather than nothing from a Theravada Buddhist perspective? Something rather than nothing? Well, there's something and nothing. You can't have something without nothing, because you got to have the dualistic pairs of ideas to balance each other out, that mutually dependently co-arise, if you will. So there appears to be something. Well, this is my own idea, and Orthodox Theravada Buddhism really does not explain why anything bothers to exist in the first place, or even bothers to seem to exist. It's like the primordial cause is ignorance, but where does the ignorance come from? It's like there's difficulty in explaining that. But my simile of the block of marble does a better job of explaining it, I think, even though it's not Orthodox Theravada Buddhism. But you start off with Hegel, who, I'm pretty much inclined to agree with Schopenhauer that Hegel was an intellectual Caliban, that he was a kind of, a charlatan, snake oil salesman. But how he starts his dialectic in his logic, that's the one thing about Hegel that I really value. It's like the very first thesis in his dialectic is pure being. And then the antithesis to that is pure non-being. Because, according to Hegel, and I think he may be right here, that pure being, this infinite formless being, and pure non-being of infinite formless non-being, they just merge into each other because, I mean, they're indistinguishable. Because neither one of them contains any kind of discrete content. They're the same. Which is one reason why nobody will prove the existence of God. If God is absolute everything, then he's also absolute nothing, in a sense. So, then you have to have the synthesis which really starts samsara going, of pure being and pure non-being. You have to have some kind of distinction. You got to have some difference. And it goes back to like the Tao Te Ching. In Daoism, first you have the Tao, then you have the one, then you have the two, and then you have the 10,000 things. Because once you start duality going, that just populates the universe with all this stuff. More than 10,000 things even. There's even more than 10,000 things in this universe. So, let's see. So you got this everything, nothing, and then paradoxically contained within the everything, nothing is just infinite possibilities. It's like the sizeless block of marble that contains every possible statue inside of it. And the statues exist only conditionally and potentially and like virtually. And that's the way existence works in Buddhism. It's virtual. It depends on non-existence too. But talking about this is it's very difficult not to just seem like one is just talking gibberish, because human languages and the human mind are they're not evolved or designed to understand this stuff or think about it. Okay, so Cleefy is thanking me and everybody who participated. Yes, I thank everybody likewise. Except for I don't thank myself, because that would be kind of conceited or something. Let's see. Meditating on a white cloth and spreading freedom right now. Yeah, CashApp is a joker. He knows his commentary. Let's see. Yeah, that's okay. Oh man, okay. Mafilez says, what is your view on black magic? Is it real and generates heavy karma? Wow, I vaguely remember somebody asking me about black magic recently, and I may not have even answered the question, because I was thinking about my father, who was like an amateur warlock. He did witchcraft. And I remember one time when I was a kid, he came to my brother and me with like this concerned look on his face and says, if you find a knife lying around with a black handle, don't touch it. Because he had two knives that he used in witchcraft, a white-handled knife and a black-handled knife. And the black-handled knife was for the black stuff. You know what I mean? So I do think that black magic exists, and it can generate heavy karma, I'm pretty sure. Like the story of Milarepa, like this great Tibetan Buddhist saint, he started off as a black magician. That his mother, his father died. His mother was just kind of supporting the kids as well as she could, depending upon some evil uncle who just defrauded her of all of her property. And so the mother, being a vengeful person, just encouraged Milarepa, to go and become an apprentice to some black magician and learn how to do it, so we can get revenge on that asshole of an uncle of yours. So that's what he did. He learned black magic and then used a spell to destroy this house. I think, if I remember correctly, he generated some kind of virtual giant centipede or something like you'd see in a video game that just knocked the house down and caved it in, and everybody inside died. And then after that, he felt like, maybe I should be doing something better with my life. And then he became like a devout Buddhist, and then eventually became a sage and saint, in addition to being a poet. Yeah, the biography or autobiography of Milarepa is really fascinating. Some of the stuff he says, like he was living out in the wilderness, and he was just living mainly on a diet of nettles. And so his whole body just turned green. His clothes just rotted off. And so he was like this naked green man living in the forest. And the villagers all thought he was a monster. They just assumed, you see some hairy, scraggly green person out there, that it's not going to be really a human. So, it's just the story of Milarepa's autobiography. It really is interesting. But getting back to black magic, yeah, I do think it is possible that black magic does happen in this world. And it can generate heavy karma. So it is good to live a pure life, be a good person, and that will help protect you from that kind of stuff too. So, Xenodemon. Is there any way to audit one's own karma? And audit, what that means, like to get like a overview of it? That it's like you're taking the class but not getting credits for it? See, is there any way to audit one's own karma? Not really. You can't really know exactly what your karma is. If you ever get psychic powers so that you can remember your past lives, you get a better idea of where you're coming from and where you're headed, kind of a thing. I said kind of a ding there. I think I tried to say thing and deal at the same time. I do that a lot. So, yeah, you can't really know for sure what your karma is until you get into the advanced psychic powers stages, and then you can see it. Because, like, the mind that is auditing things, the mind that is discerning and perceiving things, is at the surface, and there is really a subconscious mind, even though Abhidhamma philosophy doesn't mention it. That Buddhism in general, as far as I can recall, doesn't specifically mention the subconscious mind, but still the mind is operating at different levels, and we are mainly operating up at the surface level. There's all this stuff going on down below that we're not fully aware of. Some of that comes up in dreams and so forth. So, let's see. Yeah, if you want to audit your own karma, you're going to have to get to the level of psychic powers where you can look at people coming and going according to their karma. You can look at yourself in the same way and, review your past lives and realize that, you were an axe murderer 6 lives back or something. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Cryo. And Cryo says, I have seen nearly certainly auspicious signs when chanting are visions of scripture showing themselves to you, considered a blessing or just part of the path. Well, if you're meditating and you start seeing visions like that, you should just not take them seriously. Just note it and let it go, because otherwise it can become a distraction and derail your meditation. Whether it is a blessing or not, you should just accept it as an everyday occurrence. If you want blessings, especially like paranormal kind of blessings or paranormal events in general, to become just an everyday occurrence, just a normal occurrence in your life, you should not single them out as something special. You just accept them, maybe with some gratitude, and just not make a big deal of it and just continue on with your life. And that just kind of eases their entry into your version of reality. If you make a big deal of it, then it just stays a big deal, and it might not happen nearly as easily. So, visions of scripture showing themselves to you, is that considered a blessing? It certainly can be. It depends on your attitude. If you want to consider it a blessing, you certainly may. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what your mental states would be when it happens. That would be a major factor in determining, what the nature of the appearance would be. But yeah, it's certainly not anything bad. So at worst it would be neutral. And so, yeah, that's fine if it happens. That's no problem at all. And I don't know if I really answered that question or not. But even so, I'm moving on to the next one. And what is your perspective on tattoos? This is from Lucid. I've been considering getting one that says, accept the truth, because I am the kind of guy who needs to be constantly reminded. I feel the reminder would help me. Well, I don't know if it would. Accept the truth. I think even the most delusional leftist out there they think they're accepting the truth. Everyone thinks they're accepting the truth. So with regard to that, yeah, I don't think accepting the truth is nearly the best kind of reminder you can give yourself, because everyone thinks they're accepting the truth anyway, even people that are just sorely deluded. But with regard to the main question with the question mark, which is, what is your perspective on tattoos? Well, I mean, I've always resisted getting one. My father had one tattoo that he got, I think it was on VE Day. At least that's one story I heard. It just said, "Lest I forget" on his forearm. There was something he didn't want to forget. I think he was drunk at the time, though. And so, I mean, I'm not opposed to tattoos, but definitely if you ever plan on committing a crime in your life, you might want to not have any easily identifiable marks on your body. Let's see. Also, if you're going to commit a crime, just leave your cell phone somewhere else. Don't bring it with you. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I am not eager to get a tattoo. My woman would like me to get a tattoo, but it's sort of like when you get a new jar of peanut butter and you just, it just seems like such a shame to mar the smooth surface on the top of the peanut butter. It's kind of like that with my skin, or it's like I've always had an aversion towards specializing in certain things. Like, it was difficult to choose a career because if you settle on one career, you pretty much ruled out everything else. Whereas as long as you don't decide, you still have infinite options in a way. And it's sort of the same thing with that tattoo. You know, once I get mama tattooed on my arm, then I mean, there's nothing else I can get tattooed there. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, really, I like plain. You know, I'm just trying to decorate my body. I don't know. It's like in Burma, a lot of people get tattoos for like paranormal reasons, to protect themselves from snake bite or hexes or something, which in a way kind of makes more sense than just trying to beautify my aging hairy skin with a tattoo. So, let's see. I guess I answered that question. So here's a question from Brian, although it's not the infamous Brian. It is probably some mild-mannered, innocuous sort of Brian, who says, "What, if any, practice do you still do? What is still worth doing?" Well, I mean, I do still spontaneously om. Like, it happens sometimes. Like, it happened at work just a few days ago. You know, you just doing something and just om just starts repeating. So that still happens. I mean, I'm doing these Q&As. I mean, this is one of my best Dhamma practices, I think. It has me thinking about Dhamma, has me sharing what I've learned, which is, you know, I guess it's, for the most part, it's meritorious action, although really, if you're bound for enlightenment, merit is in a way, it's sort of counterproductive, because it's good karma is still karma. It's still samsaric. So, do a little walking meditation sometimes, but not very much. And mainly, my practice is, aside from spontaneous oming sometimes, and like doing a little bit of research, watching, you know, doing a little bit of study sometimes, and answering these questions, pretty much the only real Dhamma practice I still do is just mindfulness. Like when I'm at work doing something repetitive or something, even if I'm not oming spontaneously, sometimes you just kind of go into present moment mode where, you know, all that exists is just what's going on right here, right now. And no like thinking commentary, you know, you're just focused on, you know, what is happening now. So that's really about it for my practice. I did intensive meditation for 30 years, got as far as I could with it. And so it just seems like doing it part-time now would just be a pale shadow of what I was doing full-time before. And so I just don't really have a strong incentive to keep it up. So let's see here. Mara made Mahayana. Let's see. Do you think we came forward since my question in Q&A number 2, bringing conservative Buddhism forward? Man, I don't even remember Q&A number 2. I was still a monk in California at that time. I don't remember exactly what number we were at when I switched from monk to layperson. But do you think we came forward with regard to bringing conservative Buddhism forward? Well, I mean, I got more viewers now than I did then, way more. So I think we have come forward. I don't think we've come forward nearly enough to really, set down roots and become mainstream, as though Theravada Buddhism, like real Theravada Buddhism, could become mainstream in the West. I think the people that are doing that the best would be some of the monks, mainly in the Ajahn Chah tradition. Yeah, I mean, monastic Buddhism tends to be conservative. Just Asian traditional Buddhism is fairly conservative. It's the only non-conservative Buddhism in the West, for the most part, is, leftist politicized Buddhism, with rainbow flags and all that. And what is it? Doing mindfulness of your, inherent racism or your white privilege, this kind of thing. There actually are meditation retreats and meditation centers that are teaching people, you got to be mindful of your white privilege and got to be mindful of your inherent racism and all this. And that's essentially bullshit. I mean, certainly the Buddha wasn't teaching it. So I think one of the reasons why there's making some progress is, like I said earlier in this Q&A, that the really radical leftism is starting to go out of style. I mean, finally people are seeing just how insane things are getting, and they don't like it. And they'd rather get back to something more normal. And that could just indirectly help Theravada Buddhism in the West also. Getting it out of the clutches of leftist activists or whatever. So, let's see. Oh yeah, White Ash Piper is saying the 10,000 things is a metaphor. Yeah, I realize that the author or authors of the Tao Te Ching really did know that there was more than 10,000 things in this universe. Let's see. Okay. So here's one from Harim Cthulhu. I vaguely recall you saying that you had a poltergeist at home. Could you recount your experience? Well, I mean, the most spectacular experience, I've explained this before more than once. So, I mean, we would had a poltergeist that would just break things spontaneously. You just open the cabinet and there'd be the handle of a coffee cup would just be detached lying there. Silverware would come out of the dishwasher, or you just find them in the drawer all twisted and bent, like in the first Poltergeist movie, actually. And but I mean, the most spectacular event with regard to the poltergeist was when my father was hiring a new housekeeper. I was about 13 or 14 years old, and they were sitting at the kitchen table. I was sitting at the opposite end of the table from my father. The new housekeeper was sort of kitty corner from him, and there was this ashtray right in between. And my father was explaining to her, we have a poltergeist in this house, so if you find any broken dishes or anything, don't immediately blame the kids, because this poltergeist spontaneously destroys stuff. And when he's explaining this to her, it's like one of her eyebrows was starting to go up, and she's starting to get this slow grin on her face, like she can't decide whether he's joking or crazy. And then literally within just seconds of him getting to the end of this explanation, the ashtray that was on the corner right in between them in plain sight made this sound like zink, and just slid apart like 1.5 inches, and just in two almost perfect halves. And then of course she stopped smiling and started taking him seriously, because it just happened right there like he was saying. And that's that's mainly the experience of the poltergeist. So let's see. Let's keep looking here. Question. Oh man. See, if I scroll down just a little too far, then all of a sudden it just zips right down to the bottom, and then I got to scroll back up again and search for where it zipped. Let's see. NPC number 6. Can you please try to not delete this first live stream when it is done, so we can go back and rewatch it? Yeah, that's definitely what I'm going to try to do. In fact, I'm going to have to download it so I can maybe edit the first ineffectual fumblings and then put it up on BitChute and Rumble, where I am not live right now. The BitChute and Rumble people are just going to have to wait. Poor things. Okay. So let's see. I think we're getting down to the bottom here. Mafilez has a question. From a Buddhist perspective, is it wrong the use of entheogens? I think they can enhance the practice when used responsibly and very sporadically. Well, from the Buddhist point of view, you're not allowed to take intoxicants which cause cloudedness of mind or heedlessness. And like a mind-expanding drug, like a psychedelic, is not really encouraging heedlessness. In fact, for most of my life, whenever I would take a psychedelic drug or an entheogen, a spiritual plant medicine, that I would have religious experiences. I mean, that was sort of like my practice before I became a Buddhist, was just going off alone into a wilderness and dropping acid or something. So, yeah, I think from a Buddhist perspective, it's hard to say exactly, although it is true that cannabis is allowable for monks for medicinal purposes, which is kind of a strange, controversial statement, but it's right there in the texts. In the chapter on medicines in the books of monastic discipline, in the Mahavaga, the Vinaya Mahavaga. So I don't think from a Buddhist perspective it is wrong to use entheogens unless you're using them recreationally. If you're just using it to have a good time, you're partying or something, then yeah, it would not be appropriate then. But I mean, if you're like quiet, maybe alone, maybe in a peaceful surroundings, like just in your room or in a forest or something, and you take some sort of sacred plant medicine or some such that expands your consciousness. I mean, you're not just going into a stupor, but you're becoming more awake, more alert, seeing things in a different way that is ultimately just as valid as the way you usually see them, then that certainly can be of advantage to you. And most of the people who became monks that are of my generation started off with psychedelics. That's my experience, like from talking with other monks, that I don't know what it's like now, but you know, people that are like at the earliest stages of Gen X, that, and probably the later stage boomers, that, I mean the boomers, I mean, they were hippies. So yeah, there was a lot of those, probably more than the Gen X people, that started off with entheogenic substances, you know, sort of like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary experimenting with LSD and mescaline and all that. And then you just get to this point where you realize this is valuable. You're in a more expanded state. You know, your consciousness is enhanced. And so then you look for ways of cultivating that without having to rely on the chemical. And meditation is a good way of doing that. Although I have to admit that taking the drug is much more reliable and quicker than maybe dedicating years of your life to cultivating meditative states until you can get into really like profound mystical states just through meditation. It's way more sporadic to use meditation to get there. Although definitely you're generating more merit by doing it that way. Okay, Mary J's going to bed. Good night. And let's see. Okay, Pepega says, you addressed Trump versus Biden for the presidency, but have you considered RFK Jr.? Well, I might have briefly considered RFK Jr., but I'm not going to vote for him. I think he had some kind of worms eating his brain or something. I think he actually said that in an interview, that worms were eating his brain. And yeah, I think even RFK Jr. is a bit too far left for my tastes. So, let's see here. Mohammed Mahayana says, I'm glad I found you at this time when I started getting interested in Buddhism 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're with us also. Okay. Yeah, White Ash Piper says, they say that poltergeists are not caused by spirits, but rather a certain person in the active environment. Yeah, usually it's an emotionally troubled young person that is generating RSPK, RS, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Yeah, I've got a parapsychology book on the bookcase back there that talks about that. Yeah, but I don't think that I was the center of it. I was closest to being adolescent at the time, but I think it was my father just had weird stuff happen around him. He was a very liminal person, so I do think he may have been the epicenter of it. Okay, and then that's it. That's it. I answered all the questions. Just like Biden at the debate. You answered all the questions. So, I guess, considering we've been going for 3.5 hours, then I guess we're done. So, you guys know the drill. I think next time there's a good chance I'll just record it as I've usually been doing. But at least now I've done a Q&A or a live stream before. And so I may do it again sometime. Maybe for number 200. You never know. So, I guess we're good. And so if you have any questions for the next one, then feel free to include them in the comments under the YouTube video or BitChute or Rumble or whatever you're watching. Or if you have access to the Discord server, you can ask them there. And feel free to like and subscribe if you will. And be happy.